Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. Storming the prison, fairy tale attacks. Toshiro didn't even look up as the door swung open for what seemed like the 100th time. In reality it had been far less, but he wasn't exactly sure on how long he had been in the cell for. With no bars for the sun to shine through and no communication from anyone, the silence and darkness was pure agony. The only time light shone in the cell was when someone switched it on, but that hadn't happened since his session with those two men. He hated himself. He had been so afraid and terrified that he had broken. He had done something he had never wanted to do and had betrayed the people he called friends. And for what? For his nightmares they were showing him to end? Those images shouldn't have made as afraid as he had become, but they still had somehow. He had even told them about Ichigo. He couldn't remember how much he had said, but he was afraid for everything little word he spoken. He still remembered the images they used to break his will to pieces. It wasn't much different from Mayuri in general sense. It just had the addition of Ichigo acting as his friend for another experiment of Mayuri's. He didn't know how many times they had broken Hyorin Meru, but it had hurt every time. Yet despite how many times it hurt him, it hurt even more because it was silent on the other end. Hyorin Meru didn't cry back with him, and that was the worst part about that part of the torture. In the silence of his cell, he could pick up the breathing of the newcomer. He didn't need to look at them to know who they were. Karen had been coming back here multiple times, as if hoping he would respond during one of them. The first time she had visited had been when he was flicking on the edge of his consciousness, going between phases of being awake and suffering in silent pain or being asleep and getting a relief from it all. After that first visit he had woken up to find the injuries he had gained had been treated and wrapped. Even the shards of his Zanpakuto had been lined up nice and neatly on the table. Ever since then she would come to his cell every few hours, not saying anything but still standing there, observing him. He almost believed it was because she thought he would escape if she didn't keep checking on him, but that idea had slowly vanished. Even with his injuries patched up, they still hurt. He wasn't going anyway on his own, and there wasn't anyone out there powerful to break him out. Or at least not anyone strong enough that was ready to throw away their position as a legal mage. He heard a huff as Karen slammed her foot on the ground, involuntarily looking up at the sound to meet her annoyed face. "Finally, you bastard. I don't appreciate being ignored." Toshiro continued to stare at her, making Karen get more and more annoyed. "Are going to even say anything? I mean, it's pointless me being here if all we're going to do is sit and stand in silence." "Thank you." Karen gave him a confused look. "For healing me," he quickly clarified. Karen shrugged in response. "Well, it wasn't just me. Yuza helped out. I'm not the best as patching up injuries. I'm better at getting them or giving them to others. Yuza was always better at the gentler tasks than I was." "Strangely, I've never seen it that way," said Toshiro, a hint of anger in his voice that even Karen could detect. "After all, your sister is, in my mind, one of the most despicable people in the world." "Hey. I won't let you speak that way about Yuza. But of course you'd defend her. She's your sister. You're blind to her faults, and blind to her ignorance. And if you keep being rude, then I'll leave." Karen flicked her hand slightly and let the flame in her hand dim a bit. "Then you'll be all alone again. You aren't even meant to be here anyway. I'm pretty sure prisoners don't normally get healed as carefully as I was. Or get such high-ranking visitors. What are you after?" It might have been a trick of the light to Toshiro, but he could swear he saw a faint hint of red across Karen's cheeks for a second. "Like I could leave you on your own after I saw you in that state." The color quickly vanished as Karen regained her more confident tone. "I don't like those Quincy. They're too disturbing. I can't work out what I don't like about them, but there's something." A sudden noise sounded from the corridor and Karen hurried to extinguish the light in her hand, just in time to plunge the cell back into darkness as a rune knight walked into the cell block. She backed up into a corner as a small latch opened on the front of the door and a face peered in. Light illuminated everything in front of him from the outside. After a few seconds of checking, the latch slammed back shut and footsteps continued down the corridor, slowly disappearing into the distance. Karen let out a sigh of relief as the fire reappeared in her hand before she showed an annoyed look. Damn, I'm heading off. Don't want to get caught on his patrol back, especially as I'll need to make sure to get the spare keys back where they should be. See you later, Toshiro. Wait, Toshiro called out, not completely sure of what he was doing. Karen paused and frowned as she turned back, seeing the conflicting emotions on his face. What is it? Toshiro quickly debated the pros and cons of telling Karen what he knew. Those Quincy had asked about Ichigo. They must have had an idea about what they hoped Tenro Island would bring, and he probably had given away something or other about it. He didn't know what they planned, but Karen was here half the time. Even if she was an enemy, there was still one ray of hope there. He remembered something that Quincy had told him. Ichigo Kurosaki, the same surname of the very girl in front of him. He didn't always believe in coincidences, and he doubted this could even be one considering how well Ichigo hid his last name. Karen was Ichigo's sister, and that meant she would at least care for his well-being. Right? Come on, what is it? Toshiro chose his words carefully as he spoke. He couldn't risk telling her something he shouldn't after all, just in case. That Quincy. He seemed very curious about a Kurosaki. A Kurosaki? Karen clenched her fists in anger. They better not have been talking about Yuzo. If they are planning something, then I'll dash. It's not Yuzo. It's not. Karen's face flickered to worry. It's not me, is it? No. Then goat face then. Well, they are fellow generals, so I can see why dash. It's not him. Karen's eyes widened and he swore he could see a sudden burst of hope hidden within them before she was reaching forward and grabbing him by the front of his shirt, that small hope flicking with desperation. Is it him? She whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. Dad's mentioned him a few times, but he won't tell us much. Not even his name. Do you know him? Do you know my brother? Do you know where he is? When Toshiro refused to say any more, the desperation turned to anger. Tell me. Before she could say anything else, a large blast tore through the wall behind her, Karen turning in shock as she deflected any of the rubble heading towards her and Toshiro. She quickly drew her Zanpakuto as she increased the intensity of the flame in her hand. Come out. I know you're there. I can't believe it, spoke a voice from the smoke of the attack, a voice Toshiro felt his eyes watering slightly from. That voice, it was one he hadn't heard in 7 years. It wasn't Ichigo, but it was still someone who should have been dead. He would recognize the hint of teasing anywhere. Toshiro's got himself a little girlfriend. Girlfriend. Karen let the flame fly forward, the need for illumination gone now that a giant hole had been blasted through one wall to the next. The fire tore through the smoke only to reveal no one, but Karen knew better. She had been trained by the goddess of flash, so she knew a shunpo when she saw one. Her blade was already coming up before the strike even reached her, blocking what to many would have been a killing blow. Who the hell are you? Me? Asked the man, his voice distorted through the bone-white mask on his face. Karen recognized it instantly. The mask of a hollow. I think by the look you've got on your face that you know me plenty well. Advisored, muttered Karen in shock. I thought you lot weren't even real. Just stories. Stories? Is that what I ended up getting reduced to? Well, I was proclaimed dead for 7 years. Must suck if anyone took out life insurance on me. The strength behind his strike suddenly dropped and Karen quickly pushed back against him, not willing to fall for his trap. Unfortunately, that had been exactly what the man wanted, allowing her to overextend herself before he backhanded her across the cell and through the wall. He quickly reached up to the mask on his face before swiping it off and looking at Toshiro. It's been a while, Toshiro, said Shinji, a smirk across his face with traces of genuine happiness hidden beneath it. You've gotten bigger since we last met. I assume then we found you all? Oh yes, said Shinji, knowing the question Toshiro was truly asking. You lot found us all. Every last one of us. I see. Toshiro didn't care that he was crying and he didn't care to stop it. He was just so happy. Happier than he had felt in 7 years. Shinji just continued smirking, a bit friendlier than before as he brought his Zanpakuto down and cut through the chains. Shall we get out of here then? You aren't going anyway. Shinji turned around just in time to see Karen holding her Zanpakuto as it burst into flames. Burn everything till it metals, mole. Your girlfriend's got some serious magical power, commented Shinji, wiping his head slightly from the heat being generated. Not bad choice, I must say. We'll see if you keep laughing when I leave you with third-degree burns. Karen rushed forward, swinging the large blade straight at Shinji. Shinji swiftly brought up his blade to block on to suddenly have his eyes widen as the larger blade quickly began to cut through his own blade in a single swing. He barely managed to dodge the blow as it cut through the blade completely, the lower half of his blade being sent flying and falling to the floor. Hot, muttered Shinji warily. Not bad, little miss. Now that's a Zanpakuto to fear. A Zanpakuto capable of heat high enough to melt through its way through another Zanpakuto. Better take you seriously. Shinji held up his own broken blade before calling out its name. Collapse, Sakanade. The blade quickly morphed to its Shikai form, the broken fragment on the ground vanishing as the Shikai manifested the complete sword. Karen lunged at Shinji, but the Vizard was careful this time, dodging rather than blocking as he let his Zanpakuto spin. Stop dodging. You're kidding, right? Like I'll risk finding out if your Zanpakuto can cut through my Shikai too. Besides, I don't really need to fight you anyway. You've lost now. Me? Lost. Karen scoffed before she channeled a Kita spell through her blade. Kongaubaku. The flames surged forth, intensifying from her own blade's flames before she blasted them towards Shinji. Instead of trying to dodge, however, Shinji shook his head in disappointment. How sad. You haven't realized it yet. You're already under my spell. Karen looked on in shock as the flames connected and blasting another hole in the wall. They had missed. That wasn't where she had been aiming. She could have sworn she had firing the blast straight at the Vizard. How had she missed? Don't understand. Don't blame you, and unfortunately for you I don't have time to stick around and explain it. Besides, I don't like telling enemies my power unless I plan to kill them afterwards, and I really don't feel like killing you today. Farewell, Mrs. Hitsugaya. What did you dash? Karen was cut off as a hand appeared on her face and her vision vanished, her body falling limp as she collapsed. Shinji turned his attention to Toshiro, who was slowly getting out of the chair in his cell. He shakily reached for the shards of his Zanpakuto before Shinji beat him to it, pulling off his shirt and began wrapping all the blade fragments up in it. I haven't used Tanma Otoshi in a while, Shinji commented as he saw Toshiro glancing at Karen. She must have been pretty shaken up for that to have worked as well as it had. I did wonder what the cause might have been, but I didn't want to wait for that to all subside. I mentioned something that shook her up. That was probably it. Really? What was it? The fact I actually knew who her brother was. Shinji glanced at the girl again. You know someone related to her? Who was she anyway? She's Ichigo's sister. Shinji paused as he put the last shard into the shirt. Shit. I'm really glad I didn't try and kill her then when I had the chance. With the shirt tied up tightly, Shinji grabbed Toshiro and slung the man's arm over his shoulder. Let's get going then. Don't really want to be here when she wakes up. I'm not sure how long that spell will keep her under, and I don't really want to risk fighting such a strong blade out in an area where she has the advantage. You need to be careful, said Toshiro as Shinji slowly helped him through the large hole the Zero had created. It was foolish to try and break me out of here on your own. There are generals here. That's okay, said Shinji with a smirk. We've got a little surprise help on our side ourselves. Protector of the Fairies. Gildarts patiently waited for the sign for them all to act. He could see how restless everyone was around him, but this had to be done carefully. This was nothing like the experience some of them had once when they fought Phantom Lord, and they didn't even have many men with them anyway. The base in front of them belonged to the Magic Council. Only their strongest could be brought. That meant a good chunk of their numbers had been left behind, including those who were too injured to fight like the Master. The only people present were him, Shinji, who had already started sneaking into the base, Urza, Myra Jane, Laxus, Natsu, and finally Grey. Levi had protested her exclusion, but she hadn't recovered enough yet to be able to fight properly. Sure, she could cast spells, but she would be too much of a stationary target, and that would be a liability even if they had someone guarding her. They also had Byakuya nearby, the man insisting on being allowed to come. Whether that was to make sure they didn't go too far or to deal some justice himself, he wasn't sure of. He wasn't going to turn the man down, however. They needed all the help they could get. "How long we got?" asked Laxus, being careful to not let any of this magical power spill out and get them noticed. It was hard for all of them to do, even with the cloaks they were wearing. Raising your magical power too high would cause your power to be detected, and those with more magic always had trouble stopping it from leaking out. Gildarts had it the worst out of them all, since it was taking him 2 cloaks to even keep him quiet from censors. If it wasn't for Doran Bolt lending them all the cloaks, then they never would have managed to keep their power suppressed as much as it was. The man himself was waiting around somewhere, keeping an eye on the situation and waiting for the moment where he would need to pull them all back out to escape. A bit longer. Shinji snuck in about 30 to 40 minutes ago, which means he should be looking for Taoshiro in the heart of the camp, and may have found him already. We'll need to be ready for his retreat because we don't know what will happen if he gets detected. And we're sure he'll be able to break into wherever they are keeping Taoshiro. Not to misjudge his skills, but this is the center of all military power in all of Fiori. This isn't exactly like walking into another guild and breaking down the doors. Gildarts chuckled dryly. Well, we'll have to hope. The thing about plans though is that they never go as you want them to. Something always makes it blow up in your face. Laxus nodded. He knew that well. His plan when he tried to take over Fairy Tail had been perfect theoretically. Things had just caused it to fail because they had been unexpected and hadn't followed the predictions of what should have happened, not that he was complaining, of course. He just hoped this plan would go off without a hitch, however. Too much was at stake here. A sudden explosion tore through the central building in the complex, all of them looking quickly as the remains of a crimson-red beam vanished. Gildarts chuckled as he got to his feet. It seems Shinji found where they were keeping Taoshiro. And he couldn't have been a bit quieter about it? That would have alerted every single rune knight on the premise. That is where we come in. Doran Bolt, could you help us out? Doran Bolt appeared beside him, holding out his palm. Everyone grab on. When everyone had a strong grip, they vanished, instantly reappearing right in the center of the base, only high above it instead of on the ground. Good luck. Doran Bolt shouted as he released them and vanished, the mages quickly scattering as best they could in the air as they sped towards the ground. Natsu quickly expelled flames from his feet and he directed himself towards incoming rune knights. Urza instead requipped her black wing armor and headed towards another one's, Myra on her tail in her takeover form. Byakuya merely adjusted his feet and stopped, choosing instead to stay in the air for the time being and to examine the area. Gray used his ice make magic along the side of the large building they were falling down by and created ramps to keep his momentum going as well as slow himself down safely. Gildarts meanwhile just crossed his arms in midair as he fell, landing on the ground and causing everything within 50 meters to shatter to pieces as his crash magic broke the ground to soften his landing. As for Laxus, he simply activated his lightning form and took to the skies, seeking targets. He didn't have to look for long, already seeing a very large group of soldiers charging from the north. He quickly moved in, rushing down to the ground and sending lightning flying as he hit them. 10 were already falling by the time he had landed and he wasted no time at grabbing the ones nearby and throwing them away before they could react. The troops were fast to react though, 5 charging in at him at once. Laxus swiftly moved to one side as a spear tried to impale him on its point, quickly swiping out with one hand and launching a blast of lightning at the attacker and his nearby allies. He didn't even need to bother to watch as the lightning bounced between the men, each falling quickly as he focused onto the next incoming group. They would have swarmed him faster if they could have done, but his lightning form made him far too quick to be caught in any of their traps. None of them could even keep up. The rune knights quickly smartened up though, bringing up their weapons as magic channeled into the edges and points from the built-in lacrimas. Those with spears sent beams of magic of a variety of colors at him, Laxus quickly darting around them to avoid being hit. He had to more careful as he attacked the other rune knights, their weapons missing still but now far more capable of actually hitting him if they did get a lucky shot off. He quickly ducked under another blade before lightning crackled around his mouth as he lined up the whole squad. Lightning Dragon's Roar. The blast tore through their ranks, sending men flying away and crashing against buildings. Another large group was approaching, this one far larger than he wanted to fight in close range. They would probably pose too much of a threat as well since he could only multitask against so many enemies. Bringing his head back again, he drew on a larger amount of magic, making sure it would be enough to knock out them men but not kill them. They didn't want to get that on their record after all. As they got closer, he launched the large blast, wide enough to hit them all in one go. He could see the shock and fear on the faces of the soldiers as they tried to move, but it was too late. That was what he had believed. That idea was shattered as a single man appeared out of nowhere in front of his blast and deflected it with a single swing from one of his swords. The blast instead tore through the buildings to the right of him, harming no one. "It's nice to meet you, fairy friend," said the man as he tilted his straw hat at him. Despite the lazy and friendly atmosphere the man seemed to emit, Laxus found himself actually feeling cautious. The man had deflected one of his strongest attacks like it was nothing, even if it had been a watered-down version, and he had done so with only one of his two blades. It didn't help that the man was slowly walking towards him, telling the men behind him to stay back. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Shunsui Kyoraku, General of the Rune Knights. Laxus Driar, S-Class Mage of Fairy Tale." "Laxus Driar, huh? You know, I heard the rumors that Tenro Island had been found, but I honestly didn't expect to see you all here so soon, and still looking as young as you all did back then. You make an old guy like me feel even older." Shunsui tilted his hat as he walked, casting a shadow over his face that suddenly made him look far more intimidating than before. "I expected Fairy Tale would come here to reclaim their friend, but it was foolish of you to do so in your condition." "My condition?" "Yes. You see, the you 7 years ago might have been a decent threat to someone like me. The problem, however, is that the you 7 years ago is the exact same you now. The me back then, meanwhile, is not the me who I am now." "You sound confident." "Sure, it's not arrogance." "Arrogance? Well, let's find out." Shunsui took off the hat of his head before throwing it to one side. "I'll use just one blade. Throw everything you've got at me. I'll show you how much the world has changed in 7 years. Laxus waited for a second, seeing if Shunsui would make the first move. When nothing happened, however, he acted, taking the initiative that Shunsui wouldn't take. He sped forward at his fastest speed, his fist brought back ready to smash into Shunsui's head. At the last second, however, Shunsui reached out and grabbed the fist, stopping his attack in its path. It was shocking, but Laxus was quick to react, bringing up his leg from behind him as he twisted his body. Shunsui ducked as the leg soared over his head before bringing the hilt of his blade up and slamming it into Laxus's stomach. Laxus felt the air leave his body from the impact as his body lifted up briefly into the air. As Laxus quickly fell back down, Shunsui released his grip on Laxus's fist and placed the index and middle fingers of his free hand against Laxus's head. Tsukiyobi. As the fingers pressed against him, Laxus found himself being sent flying backwards as he crashed through one of the nearby buildings. He was forced to immediately jump out of the rubble as a blade sliced down through the air where he had just been. Lightning flickered under the sword where Laxus's body had been before it all exploded upwards in a massive eruption of lightning. Shunsui appeared behind Laxus completely unharmed, however, his sword slicing at the Dragon Slayer once more. The attack hit Laxus across his back before the entire body exploded into lightning, brief surprise crossing Shunsui's face from seeing the lightning clone. "Impressive," he muttered as he landed back on the ground, unharmed from all the lightning that had been expelled at him. "You switched very quickly. But there's not very many places where you could go. Now where are you, Laxus?" Shunsui glanced from side to side as if putting on a show, and Laxus knew he was really searching for his magical power. The cloak he wore was hiding a lot of it, and that was the only reason that ploy had worked. The magic he was about to use wouldn't be unnoticeable, however, so he'd have to skip the incantation, especially if he wanted to buy himself a bit more time. "Raging Bolt," Laxus whispered, a smaller version of the attack appearing between him and Shunsui and being launched straight down. The slight stiffening of the man's shoulders alerted him to that he had been discovered, and Shunsui quickly deflected the orb at the last second as it was about to hit, sending it back out of the hole that had been created from him crashing into the building. Immediately Shunsui took chase after Laxus, using Shunpo as he raced after the man retreating into the sky straight above them. A blast of lightning from above made him swerve to one side and come to a rest a few meters away from Laxus on the same level in the air. Well now, is this really all you have, Laxus? I know, you're a second-generation dragon slayer, right? That's what we've got on you in some of the files. You should be able to use some kind of variation of the legendary Dragon Force. Would you be so kind as to show it to me? Laxus snarled. The man had to know. He had been using Dragon Force ever since their fight started, and it was taking everything he had to keep up. Still, there was one last thing he could try. He quickly darted backwards, but Shunsui didn't seem to follow him, instead watching in a bit of interest. That was good. He wanted him to underestimate him. Lightning burst forth from Laxus's right hand as he held it outwards, letting his strongest spell appear. If this was how this man wanted to play it, he'd obey. Dragon Slayer's secret art, thunder-piercing lance. Oh, said Shunsui in interest. Not bad form there, and a very strong aura. That is one threatening technique. Take this. Of course, Shunsui added as the lance flew towards him, you must realize the difference between us by now. This is not nearly enough. With a single swing, Shunsui brought his sword up and sliced through the spear, the two halves going to either side of him before detonated in a storm of lightning behind him. Shunsui simply shook his head in disappointment as Laxus's eyes widened in fear. I apologize, but I'm afraid you lose, Laxus Driar. All of a sudden, Shunsui was there, his sword already swinging down. Laxus tried to move back, but he knew he wouldn't make it in time. He wasn't fast enough. At the last second, Shunsui's sword came down and hit steel, a second blade blocking the first. Shunsui looked in surprise at Laxus's savior before smiling. Well, I can't say I expected to see you here, Byakuya. Byakuya gave Laxus a look before turning back to face Shunsui. Leave him to me. Laxus quickly shook away his fear as he went to step forward. Hold on, I can help too. That's not the issue here. In order to fight Shunsui, I need someone else to keep my opponent occupied. Your opponent? Who are you? Laxus was cut off when a foot slammed down on his head from above, sending him flying back down to the ground with a large boom. Yuryuki let herself hit the air next to Shunsui before looking at Byakuya. Ah, you took little Byakuya? That's just rude to steal someone's opponent, Shunsui. Shunsui chuckled. Why don't I make it up to you later? I wouldn't mind a lovely lady such as yourself joining me for a drink. I think Naneo would have something to say about your drinking habits, but it sounds fun. Fine, them you can have, Byakuya. I'll finish off your scraps. The air simply flickered a bit as Yuryuki vanished, rushing down to the ground to face Laxus. Shunsui returned all his focus to Byakuya as he saw the man holding his sword up precisely. Scatter, Senbonzakura. You're taking this seriously, aren't you? Muttered Shunsui as he drew his second blade in response to the thousands of blade fragments floating all around them. I might as well focus a bit more as well. I have a traitor general to discipline after all. Protector of the Fairies. Natsu and Gray quickly felt their backs hit each other as they fell back against the large amount of soldiers. Their numbers kept increasing as time passed, and they only had a limited amount of magical power to draw on, along with a limited amount of focus that they could spread out at any one time. They had quickly met up with one another when they started having difficulties, using each other to watch their backs so that they could focus properly, and so far it was proving to be extremely effective. The big issue was that the number of rune knights seemed endless. They just kept coming, 5 more replacing the one who fell. There's no end to them. Shouted Natsu to Gray as he slammed the body of one of the rune knights against another, quickly spinning and slamming his other fist against another rune knight's chest. This is just ridiculous. What did you expect? Asked Gray as he blocked a blast of magic with a shield of ice. He quickly reshaped the ice on the front of the shield and converted it into a makeshift cannon, icicles firing from the surface of the shield and slamming against a swarm of the rune knights. They got back up quickly, however, the blunt weak damage not enough to keep them down. Not willing to let them have the chance to regroup, Gray lunged at them and brought his hands up into the standard form he used. Ice Make, Hammer. A lone brave rune knight took the opportunity to rush at Gray as his back was turned, firing a beam of magic from his staff and causing Gray to gasp out in pain as he was sent crashing forward. Natsu spun round and knocked the man straight out of the fight a second later. Gray. I'm okay, said Gray with a wince as he pushed himself up from the ground. Hurts like hell but I'm okay. Well, isn't this interesting? All the rune knights present froze, turning towards the source of the voice with a hint of wariness on their faces, but there was relief too. Gray and Natsu didn't let their guard down for even a moment after seeing that look. But where was the voice coming from? They glanced around but they couldn't see the source anyway. It wasn't to the left or right, in front, or behind, the only place left apart from underground was dash above. Gray shouted as he pushed Natsu to one side. Natsu's eyes widened in horror as a large arrow of blue light shot down through the sky and ripped a hole in Gray's side. Gray. Natsu flung himself at Gray and let loose a massive burst of flames upwards, knocking away the other arrows that had been quickly fired after the first. Gripping the body of his friend tightly, Natsu sped backwards away from the battlefield. He had managed to get a brief look at their enemy right before he had launched his flames and lost sight of him, but he had seen the smug look on the man's face, and he had instantly known this was no a man to take lightly. A single arrow and now his friend had a hole in his side. They had to get to someone else. He gave a glance to Gray and saw him groaning in pain, trying not to show it and also trying to freeze the wound shut so he wouldn't lose any more blood. Luckily they were near enough to some of the others to get some help. With Urza and Myra the enemy wouldn't stand a chance against 3-on-1 odds. 4-on-1 if Gray could still fight. Now this is just the height of rudeness, spoke a voice straight by Natsu's ear. Natsu looked to one side in shock as the man he had tried to escape with Gray from easily kept pace with them. He quickly enhanced his speed with bursts of flames but the man didn't even fall behind 1 inch, instead almost skidding across the air. How arrogant of you to assume you would be able to lose me. With a rapier in his hands, the man swung down at Natsu and sent a blast of energy across the short distance between the two. A brief barrier of flames was all that stopped the energy from hitting them, but the large burst forced Natsu to one side, unfortunately crashing him against a building in the process. Seeing the man walking towards them, Natsu launched his flames out in front of him and broke down the building supports, causing the hole they had made to be blocked up by the falling rubble. He's strong, muttered Gray, slowly getting to his feet. Natsu gave him a look of worry which only caused Gray to scowl at him. Relax, it's just a flesh wound. I'm not going to die from it. He did that with 1 arrow. So we'll make sure he can't hit us with any more. Now we need a plan. I'm open to suggestions, otherwise we may be forced to resort to more extreme means. Urza and Myra. They'll nearby. If we get enough people we can strike him down at once. The wall in front of them suddenly shattered as a large arrow tore through the stone. Again, more arrogance. Do you truly believe we didn't foresee such actions? You of fairy tale are so predictable when it comes to your friends. Who the hell are you? Asked Natsu, letting his flames burst out around him as he activated his fire drive. Me? I'm just a simple general of the pitiful organization you attacked. Quiljopi, the warden you could say here. Gray eyed the man suspiciously. Pitiful. Ah, said Quilj in surprise. I apologize, my mouth really does get away from me sometimes. Speech is silver, silence is golden. I mustn't say any more. Not that it matters, of course. I have no intentions of letting you two go freely after all. Aiming his sword upwards, Quilj suddenly launched a massive arrow upwards and tore apart the roof, just in time to show Urza dodging in the sky as a rain of arrows was fired at her. What shocked them both was that Myra was slung over her shoulder, looking like she was unconscious and yet still seemed to shake uncontrollably. A man rapidly chased after them in the air, keeping up with the projectiles to ensure Urza was kept from having time to think. My associate should be handling your 2 little friends up there, and I'm sure the other generals have already mobilized against the rest of you fairies. I'm sure we could come to some agreement, however, if you so wish. After all, you are Natsu Dragneel, are you not? And you are Gray Fullbuster. That's who we are, yeah, stated Gray, subtly building up his magic. And what the hell could you want from us after all the mess we're causing? Oh well, it seems we've lost a certain individual, and I don't really see him here with you. I know he escaped as well, but I would be quite thankful if you could direct me to Ichigo Kurosaka's location. Kurosaki? Did you not know? Quilj shook his head. Hiding such an old and honorable name, I don't understand what went through that man's mind. But such trivial facts do not matter. His Majesty is quite interesting in meeting the old wizard saint, and I'm more than willing to do a few unsavory tasks to obey his will. His Majesty? Muttered Natsu questioningly. The king? What the hell does he want with Ichigo? I take by the fact that you have yet to answer my question means you have refused to cooperate. That's okay. We have other ways to get the truth out of you. Death is hardly a concern in that regard. You won't get that chance. Shouted Gray as he lunged forward, a blade of ice being created and clashing against Quilj's own. The Quincy raised an eyebrow at the blade, noticing the ice rapidly spreading across to his blade. He swiftly pulled back and the blade of his sword broke apart into specks of blue light. That same light suddenly was pulled back and reformed the sword, all traces of ice gone. Natsu took that chance to attack as well, a flame claw extending forward and latching onto Quilj's chest. He spun round and smashed the Quincy against a wall before the man's sword slashed through the flames that made up the arm and severed the connection. Quilj slowly stood up and dusted his clothes down, unharmed from the entirely affair and unworried as Gray and Natsu both charged him at once. Honestly, you two are becoming far more of a nuisance than I anticipated. I really don't like such weak individuals as yourselves even holding onto a scrap of belief in victory. Quilj quickly vanished from their sight as they were about to grab him, Gray quickly spinning around the moment Quilj had vanished and used his ice blade to catch Quilj's own. It lasted only a second before the strength behind Quilj sliced through it, almost catching Gray across the chest in the process. Natsu leaped over Gray and slammed down with the flames making up his tail, leaving slight singes on Quilj's head. Fire Dragon's tail. Quilj suddenly reached up and grabbed the tail of flames, the fire not leaving a mark on his skin as he gripped them. A strange pattern could be seen across Quilj's skin for a moment by his hand before Natsu found himself flung away, Quilj leaving himself open for a second. Gray took that chance and lunged, his hand opened wide as he tried to get a grip on the man. A solid grip and he knew he would win. The man would die but he couldn't afford to be hesitant when they were fighting for their lives. His hand was mere inches away when a sneer shot across Quilj's face, Gray only having a second to swear as he realized it was a trap. Crap dash. Anything else Gray might was said was cut off as Quilj stabbed forward, his blade piercing straight through Gray's chest and causing the mage to spit up blood as he gasped in pain. Gray fell limp down to the ground as Quilj drew his blade back, turning his full attention to the horrified Natsu. Gray. There was no rush for Quilj as he slowly walked to the Dragon Slayer. He could see the pure rage in the man's eyes but he had nothing to fear. That fire drive was pathetically easy to deal with for him. He brought up his sword and 5 arrows started to generate as he prepared to finish Natsu off. Have pride in that you get to be killed by such a holy technique. Heilig feel. The 5 arrows burst forward, almost touching Natsu when they were suddenly destroyed by a massive wall of flames bursting to life in front of Natsu. Quilj stared at it in annoyance until that annoyance shifted to curiously in shock as he watched the flames slowly start to spread out, almost as if they had a will of their own and were rebelling against Natsu's control. Natsu slowly stepped out of the wall of flames, his entire body cloaked in even more intense flames with vicious winds slicing at the ground around him. Heavenly Flame Dragon Mode, release. Heavenly Flame Dragon Mode? Well, this doesn't fit the profile we have of you. I'm sure you were meant to be only a normal fire dragon slayer. Natsu didn't waste time talking, charging forward fast enough to cause Quilj to be caught off guard and have to dodge with his own burst of speed. Doing so pushed him away from Gray's body and Natsu took shameless advantage of it now that his friend was out of the way. Swiping down with one arm, a massive wave of flames burst forward, winds fanning them to greater heights as they tore across the ground. Heavenly Flame Dragon's Wing Slash. Quilj quickly brought an arm up to the attack only to wince as he pulled it back, dodging the remainder of the attack instead. He made to say something only to suddenly see Natsu pulling his head back, large amounts of flames spilling from his mouth. Heavenly Flame Dragon's Roar. Quilj instantly tried to dodge but the attack moved far too quickly at such a short distance between the two of them and the range was too widespread, along with carrying on towards the edge of the military complex and continuing out beyond. Quilj let out a scream of pain as he felt his entire body being burnt black, his magic struggling to keep him alive. After only a few seconds, the flames around Natsu began to fade. Natsu collapsed to his knees in exhaustion, the energy he had stored completely exhausted. He hadn't even thought he would have been able to access that power again, but it seemed luck had helped. Not much, but it had helped a bit. He quickly pushed himself to his feet shakily as he tried to move towards Gray's body. He had to check. He didn't want to believe it. Only when he was by Gray's body did he finally let out a sigh of relief, Gray slowly breathing despite the injury he had sustained. He thought the man had stabbed Gray in the heart, but it seemed he must have missed. "Hey Gray? You okay to move?" There was no response, but he didn't expect one from Gray in his condition. Instead he reached down carefully as slung an arm of Gray's over his shoulders. "Come on buddy. Let's get you somewhere safer, alright? You think I'll let you escape?" Natsu froze, turning round in fear as he saw Quilge stumble out of the out-of-control fire, his skin blackened from the heat and yet still showing Quilge to be very much alive, even if a few strange blue strings of energy were being used to hold him up without being attached to anything. "In the name of His Majesty, I won't allow any of you to escape." Quilge slowly raised a gloved left hand upwards, the only part of clothing not damaged at all from the flames. A five-pointed cross seemed to shine in the center of the glove, the middle point glowing as light started to spread out from it between the gaps in the cross. Right before it was fully activated, the man who had been fighting Urza and Myra appeared by Quilge's side, grabbing the glove and stopping the activation of what Quilge had wanted to do. Quilge looked at him in outrage before slowly calming himself down when he saw the blank look in his associate's eyes. "I understand. Control myself. Don't let such puny thoughts of vengeance distract me. I shouldn't need to remind you of that. Do not force me to have to report this lack of intelligence to His Majesty. I understand. What happened to your opponents?" A look of annoyance crossed Asnod's face. "They escaped. Speaking of which, we may be about to lose these two too." Quilge quickly swung round, an arrow of light flying off his sword towards the two fairy tale mages. Before it could reach, Doran Bolt appeared beside the two and vanished once again, taking the two mages with him. Quilge swore before slamming his fist against one of the few remaining walls nearby, causing it to shatter. "Natsu Dragneel, don't think this is over. Protector of the fairies. Things aren't really turning out well for you, are they?" Gildarts shook his head, keeping one eye on the general in front of him even as he glanced towards the others. Urza and Myra were being pushed back, or to be more correct they had been. Now it was only Urza. That man truly is a dangerous one if he took down Myra so easily. "I don't feel too bad. If it helps, I really don't like Asnod either. He really is an unpleasant fellow. I'm surprised you haven't attacked me yet as well." Gildarts turned back just in time to see Asnod give him a goofy grin. "Well, I can't really be bothered to fight, you know. I mean, it's such a pain and I'd prefer to avoid it. Besides, you're completely different from everyone else. You've noticed it, haven't you? What those 7 years have done to you all." "I have now. We didn't weaken. The world instead grew stronger in that time." "Precisely. Almost all of fairy tale can't really be described as they used to be. All but you. I don't know how you would rate nowadays, but I'd rather not try and find out. That's almost like you are admitting that I would win. What's to stop me attacking you right now? Massive casualties." Ishin shrugged. "Perhaps you don't want to fight either. Or perhaps you don't know if you can win, and you'd rather take the standoff we have between us right now to ensure I can't interfere anywhere else." Gildarts tried not to let anything show on his face. Despite the goofiness the man showed, he had a lot more intelligence than he was letting on. Ishin has introduced himself to him only a few minutes after he had landed, acting like they were both good friends. He had even told all the rune knights nearby to leave everything to him before basically standing in a relaxed stance 20 meters away. He would have attacked by now if not for the man's hidden intelligence. The man was a general and he was seeing first-class examples of their power throughout the other fights nearby. He spared a glance upwards to see Byakuya being pushed back, despite the hundreds of tiny blades at his command. He wasn't sure where Laxus was currently, but the sounds of crashing every so often probably belonged to him. As for Natsu and Gray, he'd lost sight of where they had ended up. They were probably fighting elsewhere, but he did worry for them. If they were facing an opponent as strong as the other generals, he wasn't sure they could win. Not with this much difference in strength. Those worries suddenly changed when a massive surge of flames broke upwards towards the sky. Those weren't Natsu's normal flames, but they were still undoubtedly from him. The same flames that had set Tenro Island ablaze. Well, that's not good, stated Ishain, seeing the same sight as Gildarts. A trace of worry had slipped into his voice and his hand slowly lowered to the Zanpakuto by his side. I really did want to settle this peacefully between you and me, but those flames aren't normal flames. I can't afford to let them go out of control here. Before the blade was even halfway out of the sheath, Gildarts lunged at him. His hand was only a moment away from touching Ishain when the Shinigami vanished, reappearing right above Gildarts with his sword being brought down in an arc. The blade never reached Gildarts, the fairy tale mage suddenly pivoting on his heel fast enough that the air around him seemed to shatter as his hand caught the blade. Ishain raised an eyebrow at the sudden burst of speed Gildarts had shown before sighing. I had really hoped this could have been easy. Ishain wrenched his blade back, no wound being left in Gildarts' palm. The general used Shunpo the moment he was free to ensure Gildarts wouldn't get a chance to get a hit off, darting from side to side around Gildarts as he rapidly launched strikes at his chest. Each time the blade was deflected away, Gildarts managing to keep up as he spun round incredibly fast. The very ground at Gildarts' feet was already starting to crumble to pieces with each passing second, the air as well looking to almost have cracks along it. Each time Gildarts moved, a mixture of a cracking and booming sound happened, the only sign that he was using his magic so extremely. Gildarts suddenly dodged one of Ishain's strikes, disrupting the rhythm that Ishain had accidentally fallen into. His hand clenched into a fist as he drove it towards Ishain's chest, even the man's ability to dodge backwards not enough to make him pause. Crushing evil, spreading the truth, Akazuchi. Almost like a bolt of lightning, a massive amount of crash magic tore across the space between the two and sent Ishain flying backwards, his sword shakily keeping the attack from connecting with the rest of his body. With a large cry he deflected the attack, letting it crash against one of the nearby buildings and to pulverize it completely. Gildarts took the time to ease up on the energy around him, taking in large gulps of air. He wasn't sure how long he'd be able to keep this up. Right now he was probably faster than Ishain, but only so long as Ishain was near him. He wouldn't be able to move as fast as he was across the distance now between them, but he was at least confident he could block any long-range attacks in that time. It was also reassuring to know Ishain was a Shinigami, meaning he would likely also want to get close as well to use his sword. Still, he wouldn't win a battle of endurance here. Moving at the speed he was used up a tremendous amount of magic since he had to shatter the air to such intense degrees, and it didn't help either his body wasn't used to moving so quickly. He'd have to either win soon or it would all be over. Sprinkled on the bones of the beast. Sharp tower, red crystal, steel ring. Move and become the wind, stop and become the calm. The sound of warring spears fills the empty castle. Ah, I remember that kid spell. Gildarts brought up a hand in front of him. That means I know how to best break it. Hada number 63, Reikau Urhau. A large burst of lightning shot out of Ishain's open palm, Gildarts shattering the spell as it reached a few meters in front of him and causing the spell to explode. The sudden increase of magic was his warning to Ishain's sudden attack, the smoke from the explosion being swiped away as Ishain swiped through it. Getchuga Tenshou. Of all the attacks to expect, Gildarts hadn't expected that one. He couldn't stop his eyes from widening in shock before quickly bringing up his other hand and forcing the crescent slash of energy to break apart. He took a few steps back cautiously as he kept an eye on Ishain. I recognize that attack. That's the move Ichigo uses. Ah well, I suppose most people would associate it more with him nowadays. I don't normally have to break this out. I can see why. You're strong on your own, but that technique takes it to another level. It's stronger than Ichigo's when he was younger. Is it? Ishain frowned slightly. Well, I suppose that should make sense, but it still surprises me considering what his Zanpakuto probably does. He's got it easier in that regard sometimes. I need to put a lot more effort into my versions of the attack. Ishain quickly shifted his blade as a large aura of magic started to spirally around him, looking almost like flames. Gildarts followed suit as the ground around him shattered to pieces, his hair and cloak being pushed upwards from the intense pressure of his magic. If the cloak suppressing his magic hadn't given out by now, then he reckoned it just did, because there was no way it would be able to handle this much magic being released. Berndesh's Hein was completely stopped from calling out his Zanpakuta's name when Laxus crashed through a wall nearby, bouncing along the ground before coming to a rest when he smacked into another wall. Yuryuki appeared over Laxus's body, cracking her knuckles in the process. Well, that was kind of fun. At least you were fast enough to keep me entertained. Yuryuki glanced over her shoulder and stopped the two men fighting. Ah, did I interrupt you too? Sorry about that. Don't worry about it, said Hein before he slowly started to sheath his blade. Gildarts frowned as he did so, calling the man out on it. Why are you pausing? I thought you needed to rush against me. Well, yeah, I do. But I'm kind of hoping you'll surrender now. It's 2-on-1, and if you can barely handle me alone, then you won't be able to deal with two of us. So I'll give you this chance to choose what to do. Surrender or keep fighting. I'd rather you choose the first if you could. Gildarts glanced towards Laxus, Yuryuki seeing where his gaze was being directed to before winking and placing her foot over Laxus's neck threateningly. He avoided swearing at the situation. If he even moved, she would probably do something, and he couldn't risk the off chance that she would actually go through with her threat. A sight at the corner of his eye, however, brought back hope. Answer me this at least, said Gildarts as he let the aura of magic around him fade away. You can use the same technique as Ichigo. Are you related to him in any way? Well. Hein scratched the back of his head as he laughed awkwardly. That rebellious little fairy is my son. I'm just kind of glad he didn't get involved in this whole incident, though it does surprise me considering we had Toshiro here. Where is he anyway? Gildarts shrugged, patiently waiting for a chance to appear. Who knows? Kisuke took him somewhere, so none of us are really very sure. Kisuke, huh? A slight coldness had entered Hein's voice after hearing the man's name. Well, I suppose he's in capable hands at least. So long as Ichigo's fine, then I suppose that's the main thing. Kisuke's alive, huh? Yuryuki wasn't sure whether to smile or scowl at that. The man both infuriated her and filled her with joy, normally at the same time. Hearing that one of her oldest friends was alive left her unsure of how to react. It was that moment when Doran Bolt made his move, appearing right beside her and pressing his hand against her back. Less than a second later and then we're gone, Doran Bolt arriving back without her. He quickly grabbed Laxus before vanishing, Hein not bothering to stop him. We're retreating, said Doran Bolt as he appeared by Gildarts' side. We have Toshiro and we're losing this fight. I've already extracted almost everyone else. Gildarts spared a glance upwards, spotting Byakuya being beaten back, especially as other generals slowly started to approach him. Hurry then. Let's get out of here. You need to grab him before Yuryuki reappears from wherever you teleported her to. A woman of that speed won't be stopped for long. Doran Bolt nodded and then they were gone, Hein still not doing anything to stop them. Instead he looked towards the flames that were still spreading before he started walking towards them, prepared to halt their advance as best as he could. Fairy Tail was running, but now wasn't a time to give chase. Now was a time to ensure his men were okay. Protector of the fairies. Byakuya wasn't unaware as the fights started to end all around him. It meant only two things. They had been defeated, a very high possibility, or they were retreating, again another high-ranked event. Until he saw Doran Bolt he wouldn't know which it was, but he didn't even have time to spare the focus on finding him. Even a moment to hesitate, a moment to stop moving, and he'd probably find himself impaled on the end of Shunsui's swords. He always knew the man was strong. He had fought him on occasions, but he had always assumed the lazy man only put the minimal amount of effort into his training, preferring to go drinking instead. He had been far wrong. Unlike Hein, who had vanished for a few years, a time long before he had joined the Magic Council, Shunsui had continuously honed his skills. How much had the man been holding back against him for all these years? How much of his known strength was a lie? It was made worse by how their fight was progressing. He was being forced to fall back, and he had hundreds of blades at his disposal. It was close, but Shunsui still had managed to gain that small advantage, and the man had yet to even release his Zanpakuto. As each fight ended as well, another general or similar level strength mage was freed up. Yuryuki was out there somewhere and he only hoped Laxus could keep her occupied for as long as he could. He could not fight both her and Shunsui at once. At the rate the fight was going, however, any other additions to his fight would require him to use his Bankai, and he could not risk using it. Not when there were Quincy on the other side of the battlefield. As Shunsui rushed him, he quickly brought his hands together and closed his palms around each other. Blades darted forward into a cage, but Shunsui broke through it with a quick blast of Kidou and kept up his assault. With Shunsui getting so close, Byakuya was forced to create a barrier of the blade fragments, else risked getting hit. As the blades moved in, however, Shunsui vanished, Byakuya twisting his body instantly to turn what would have been a fatal stab at his heart to instead become a slash at his side. Distance quickly opened up between the two as Byakuya put all his effort into burst of Shunpo, Shunsui not following. Byakuya knew why. The man's Shunpo was far superior to his own and would cover the distance he had opened up in one step. Carefully watching his opponent, Byakuya let a small layer of Kaido be applied to his wounds as he hurried to patch them up even a small amount. It wasn't pretty, but it stopped the bleeding enough so he wouldn't bleed out. He was surprised Shunsui was letting him even do this, but they had been comrades in the past. Perhaps this was his way of being lenient to some degree. "You know, Byakuya," called Shunsui, his blades not ever leaving their threatening posture, "I'm disappointed in you." "Disappointed? Disappointed in me?" A dark look appeared in Byakuya's eyes as the blade fragments around him burst to life and shot towards Shunsui. "It is I who is disappointed in you. You, the wisest of all of us, and by far the oldest and strongest, still serve such a despicable government." "All governments have their dark sides, Byakuya," said Shunsui as he darted between blades without a care. Even Juushiro, the beloved chairman, was no exception. "Sometimes there is no choice but to accept it." "And I did," snarled Byakuya. "For 7 years, I allowed my pride and honor to be tarnished. My men, the men who put their lives on the line and followed me, I allowed their families to believe they were all dead by Fairy Tail's hands. I was a coward. But finally I got the chance to change that. And they killed them all." Shunsui's took a misstep in surprise and Byakuya took advantage of the sudden weakness, sending all his Shikai's power straight at Shunsui. Right before the attack hit, however, he saw a shift in Shunsui's blades as their form suddenly shifted before a slash of wind cut through his attach and Shunsui was past them. Byakuya's defense was gone and without a way to counter, Shunsui quickly slashed down at Byakuya's chest, his sword already returned to its sealed state. Byakuya felt his strength weakening as the blade cut across his chest, blood splattering everywhere as he let himself fall back a few steps. His hand clutched up at his chest, but he couldn't focus enough beyond the pain to perform the delicate art of Kaido. He couldn't even do a rush job to try and help. "I know what you are feeling, Byakuya," Shunsui finally said solemnly. "But what you are doing right now is not the way. What do you think would happen if the people lost the trust of the Magic Council? They almost did forever once, and it took everything we had to ensure peace stayed present at the time. The Magic Council is a necessary evil." Shunsui slowly started to sheath his blades before adding, "But the Magic Council is a symbol. There are other means to ensure victory, you know. Ones that won't plunge the world into chaos." "You?" Byakuya looked at Shunsui in shock. "You mean your dash?" He didn't dare say any more as other familiar faces suddenly appeared around them. He steadied his indifferent look onto his face before allowing all the blade fragments to return to him. "I see you two are out prowling. Did you have trouble dealing with Fairy Tail, Quilge?" Quilge gripped his sword tightly as a sneer crossed his face. "Well, isn't this a surprise? We lost some fairies, but at least we'll get a traitor general instead. I was wondering if you'd show yourself too. You lost them." Byakuya allowed his Shikai to return to its sealed state, sheathing the blade immediately after. "It seems I must depart them. Don't think your little teleporting friend can save you. I won't allow you to escape," Quilge said as nod sharply in warning. Quilge took a moment to look at him, and in that moment Doran Bolt made his move, appearing right by Byakuya, grabbing onto him. "You won't escape," shouted Yuryuki as she appeared right before them. She almost touched them, but it was too late, Doran Bolt managing to move again before she could close that tiny distance. Her hand grabbed thin air before she let out a cry of frustration. Quilge did the same while as Nod simply looked down at the fire in a strange trance of fascination. As for Shunsui, he simply watched it all, a fake reassuring smile on his face as he let his gaze fall to the corner of his eye. In the shadows down there, he could see him. The chairman's watchdog, watching like he always did. And reporting. Protector of the fairies. The Zanpakutu and I. Makarov took another sad look at all his children in the makeshift hospital before leaving, not able to face it anymore. When they had gone to rescue Toshiro, he had never expected this to be the outcome. It was far worse than he had even imagined. Injuries had almost been expected but not to this degree. Gray had a hole torn through his side and he was lucky that he hadn't bled out. That wasn't even the worst of it for him, however. There was a wound over his heart that should have killed him. And yet he was still alive. Even Wendy was confused. It was her who even noticed in the first place. Whatever had happened, Gray was extremely lucky. He wasn't the only one in pain, however. Myra had yet to wake up for longer than a few minutes, and when she did she was in hysterics, crying and screaming in fear. Lysina and Elfman hadn't left her side for more than a few minutes at once, and never both at once except for once. The time where Myra woke up and they weren't there had been far worse than any others. Laxus was in a better condition than those two at least, but he had his fair share of injuries. One of his arms were broken along with at least 3 rips, and he wasn't walking properly either. Wendy was currently healing him last he checked, so hopefully he'd make a full recovery. He was also worried about Laxus's mental state as well after seeing what Myra was like. Natsu and Urza were, out of everyone, in the best condition. Few wounds, partly due to the sacrifices of the others in their words, and primarily just exhausted from draining all their magic in the fight. He couldn't help but worry about them both still though. They had each seen a friend they cherished experience tremendous pain, Natsu even believing Gray had died for a few moments. That pain was never something he wanted any of his children to feel. He found Gildarts right where he expected. The man's enormous amount of magical power was probably the only reason he came back looking so well, even if he had used up a very good chunk of it all. Gildarts didn't even look up when Makarov entered, instead doing another push-up as he increased his count further. 998. 999. 1000. Letting out a sigh of relief, Gildarts pushed himself up and wiped some of the sweat off his brow. Damn, that took far too long. I used to do this so much faster when I was younger. We all get old, said Makarov, chuckling despite the situation. How do you think I feel? At least you hit your prime earlier than I did. I was already starting to grow old when I became as strong as I did. That's true enough. Gildarts turned to face Makarov before bowing his head. I'm sorry. Sorry? For what are you apologizing for? I agreed to this plan after all. But I didn't say anything against it. It was foolish of us to try and pull such a stunt straight after we got back. We should have waited. We should have allowed everyone to recover. True, said Makarov as he walked forward, his hands in his pockets. We could have. And maybe that would have been for the best. I see my children in pain and I hate myself for putting them through it. And then I see Toshiro, much older than my original memories of him showed, and I realize that maybe it might have been worth it. Did you see him? Asked Makarov as he continued when Gildarts didn't say anything. He's hiding it a bit, but he's thrilled to see we're all alive. He, Kana and Fried have been talking a lot while he's been stuck in his bed, poor Lyusica hovering nearby half the time to ensure he actually does what he's told. He doesn't always, it seems. I didn't even think little Toshiro would gain a rebellious streak. I saw him, muttered Gildarts. He's disappointed though. We both know that none of us are who he really wanted to see. There's a bit of anger there too, but I'm not sure of the cause just yet. True, but Ichigo is not here. I don't mind if we have all been delegated to second best, so long as he is now safe with us. Besides, he knows now that Ichigo is alive, so I'm sure that cheered him up. Shinji has been sticking close to him as well, which doesn't surprise me considering how well they knew each other back then. Makarov quickly shook his head as he got to the heart of the matter of what he wanted to ask. That's for later, however. The entire team we sent was almost decimated. What happened? Or better yet, how strong were they all? I mean, even Laxus wasn't strong enough. Only you were. Gildarts grimaced. It wasn't good. I mean, I fought this general called Ishine, he's Ichigo's father, which I assume you met a while ago, and he was tough. I was forced to use my magic to its maximum potential, and it was the only thing that put us on even ground. But he hadn't released his Zanpakuto yet. I don't know what might have happened if he had. Maybe I still would have been able to go further, but I don't think I would have won if it dragged on for too much longer at that point. Well, your magic is very powerful on its own, so I'm sure you would have been able to handle it, so long as it was a straightforward type of power and not something too unexpected. Do you know about any of the others? Gildarts shook his head. Not really. All I know is from the others and the stuff I saw in the distance. I can tell you what the others told me if you want. That would help. Any info to get a good grasp on the situation. All right. Gildarts walked to one side before pulling up a chair and sitting down on it. Makarov followed suit by jumping onto a crate and crossing his legs. Where to start? Well, I suppose Urza and Natsu's opponents would be useful, considering the states of Grey and Myra at least, but I honestly don't know who they fought, even from the descriptions given. I don't know if they were a part of the Magic Council 7 years ago, but if they were, then they certainly didn't appear in the limelight. They are Quincy, stated Byakuya, surprising the two as he joined them. He had discarded the jacket and shirt he normally wore in exchange for a long chain of bandages, covering the large sword slash he had received from Shunsui. Mirti quickly followed behind him, keeping a worried eye on him at all times. May I join you too? Feel free, offered Makarov, Byakuya quickly pulling up chairs from him and Mirti as he sat near Gildarts. As I was saying, those two are Quincy, and are some really unpleasant fellows to be around. Quiljopi, the warden of the prison, and Desnod, the master torturer. Even the other generals like myself, or at least when I was one, found them disturbing, but we put up with it. Everyone has their flaws and we had our own groups anyway to interact with. They did keep butting in, however, added Mirti with a scowl. Yuriyuki normally came round to visit us all, I'm sure you know her, and she has these apprentices with her. One of them is a Quincy like them and she needed teachers. They offered and there was no way to say no when no one else would be able to give her the training she would need in her magic. Yuriyuki got apprentices, did she? Makarov smirked. And here I thought that woman would never be bothered to have any. I thought she believed they would slow her down. Byakuya shook his head. They're actually quite good. Ichigo's entire family doesn't seem to have any weak links as far as I can see. Ichigo's family? They're his sisters then? Or cousins? Sisters. Younger and twins, both 18 now if I'm remembering correctly. Ishine normally drags me and Shunsui round to celebrate on special occasions, though never those two Quincy. Tolerance but not acceptance. Yuriyuki has gotten stronger too, I'm assuming, said Gildarts as he cut in. Laxus said he fought her, and she was ridiculously fast. She is. I would like to think Laxus might have stood a better chance 7 years ago, but it truly is hard to tell. Her speed is beyond anyone I have ever seen, especially when you consider it's the only real side of her Shinigami magic that she normally uses. I've never even seen her Zanpakuto. Even Ichigo back then wasn't as fast as she was, and with his Bankai that is saying something. If she wished she could probably even replicate his Phantom Step ability, though I doubt it would be as effective without the addition of Sonito. Still, she could brute force it with how fast she can accelerate. What about you? Who did you fight? Byakuya paused for a moment. Shunsui Kyoraku, the man who I think it the strongest out of them all. He hides so much of himself from everyone, even his own power, and I didn't expect him to be so strong. I was using my Shikai, and I'm not weak by any means. I'm either equal or stronger than anyone here. And yet I couldn't even force him to use his own Shikai except for one brief moment. That is the level of difference between me and him. I know him, said Makarov quietly. I met him once or twice during a Wizard Saint meeting. He was occasionally called in to give an account of a situation he was a part of, and his opinion was weighted very heavily to Juashiro. They were old friends if I remember correctly. One dealt with the political side of the world, the other dealt with the military side. Shunsui always seemed to make everyone around him fall into a relaxed state, but those strong enough like myself never truly settled into it. He's a good man, but he's also a dangerous one. You aren't wrong about him being a good man. I'm not sure on this. But it's something that has been on my mind. When we fought, it was almost like he was trying to tell me something. If he was really serious about killing me, he had plenty of opportunities. That's how strong he is. Instead, he let me dictate the entire flow of the battle until the end, and it would have been easy for him to stop me doing that. He told me how he views the Magic Council, how they are necessary, and he what? Byakuya swallowed nervously, though it didn't show on his face. I believe he plans to betray the Magic Council. There was silence from everyone. No one knew what to say to that. On one hand, it was a good thing for them at the moment. But then why had he stopped them? And if he viewed the Magic Council as necessary, why did he plan to betray them? I can't pretend like I know what he's planning. He keeps all his cards close to his chest, but I know he doesn't do anything lightly. He must have been planning whatever he is planning for a long time now. He does realize what exactly that will do, doesn't he? Asked Mirti. I mean, it's different for people like us to fight. We're fugitives of the law. You betraying them will undoubtedly cause a large stir, but it would be nothing compared to if General Kyoraku betrayed them. He was Juoshiro's right-hand man after all, and nothing would hurt the Magic Council more than if he left. It would cause an uprising against them, muttered Gildarts. Despite how Juoshiro's career ended, he still was loved by many, and they respected his authority too. People were happy when Grand Doma appeared, but there were mutterings about how different and strict he was compared to Juoshiro. He only got worse these past few years. Byakuya sighed. Even the other generals and I barely got to see him nowadays, communication normally going through Lahar, his personal watchdog. He barely even appears in public as well, especially these past 3 years. Makarov frowned. He sounds paranoid. But what would he have to be paranoid about? The king. Everyone looked at Mirti as she said her suggestion, the girl suddenly becoming nervous when she noticed how intense their eyes were looking at her because of her suggestion. Ah, it's nothing. Just random thoughts. No, said Byakuya, cutting off her attempts to withdraw from the conversation. Say it. Why do you believe the king is involved? Mirti pressed her hands together nervously. Well. You said it yourself once, didn't you? The only place the Magic Council has no authority is in Crocus, the capital city of Fiori. The king has supreme authority there on all matters. It was a clause created long ago when the Magic Council was first created in order to delegate magical matters to more suitable people, and yet still allow the king to keep control of the county. One rules magic, the other rules the land. It was more to create a united ruler for magical matters, but you got the gist of it all. The Magic Council's influence spreads to many countries, but it doesn't rule them, and none of them have such a heavily concentrated presence as they do here, partly due to the massive difference in magical population than anywhere else. Exactly. It's what made me think of the king as well. Grand Doma seemed to have become a lot stricter when it comes to order, no matter who it is. If we knew about the strange magic coming from Crocus, then he must have as well. He could want to act there but is afraid to because he knows what disobeying the orders of the king will cause if he sends in a large force of troops. I'm sorry, said Makarov, cutting in. You may have to catch some of us up here. Strange magic at Crocus. Byakuya nodded. While I do not have the majority of the information, I do know that Doran Bolt, along with Mistogan and Nozomi, were researching into the matter for a while now. Of course the latter two are basically out of our reach, but Doran Bolt may have some answers I do not know. What I can say, however, is that a strange magical power has been sensed coming from Crocus for the past 7 years, and only during a 5-day period each year. It just so happens to coincide with something that was created after you all were declared dead. The Grand Magic Games. It's a fun tournament to watch, said Mirti, a hint of her excitement in her voice. All the mages in it use their magic to their full potential and try to win and make their guild number 1. Some of the battles are amazing, or at least they are when you get some of those really strong mages. And the year coming up is meant to be amazing considering the prize being offered. Ah yes. It's a strange thing to offer, but the king himself has agreed to grant any request to the winner, so long as it is in his ability to grant and not something he would refuse to do, like give away his daughter for example, or to order someone's death. He's been foolish too. He even opened it up to Desh. Byakuya froze as he realized the next words, Gildarts frowning at the thought of what could make the man in front of him freeze up. Opened it up to who? Excuse me a moment, said Byakuya, getting out of his seat. I need to check something. Is there a problem? No, but I need to be sure first. Hold on please. Byakuya quickly excused himself, leaving Mirti alone with Gildarts and Makarov for a few minutes. It didn't take Makarov long to notice she kept shooting glances at him every so often. Are you okay? Is there something you want to ask? Mirti shook her head, looking down at her feet. I'm sorry. Sorry. Makarov frowned. Sorry for what? Back then, 7 years ago, I ran. I was scared and I begged someone to save me, and there you all were being brave even when faced with Acknowledge. You acted kindly to me, even if you were suspicious, and yet I still left you all for dead. Has that been bothering you? Mirti nodded, biting her lip. A bit. You shouldn't feel bad because of that, said Makarov honestly, a smile on his face. You weren't a part of our guild. You had been an enemy only a few hours beforehand. I do not blame you for being scared and wanting to run. And we were only brave because we had each other. You had no one back then. I'm just happy to see you found a new path, one no longer taking you down into darkness. Besides, added Gildarts as he let out a laugh. We're all still alive, so it's all well and good. Don't worry about it at all. There was a few moments of silence for the group before Byakuya finally reappeared, this time followed by Doran Bolt. Well? Asked Makarov as they approached. Did you confirm what you wanted to? Byakuya nodded. Yes. I've checked my suspicions with Doran Bolt and he agrees with me. And? The king, he's a politician. He knows the importance of words and each one has a purpose. He was taught from birth to do that, and his daughter is likely undergoing similar training for when she eventually takes the throne. That's why it was so strange when he said all guilds could enter. What's so wrong with that? Asked Gildarts, crossing his arms. Sounds standard to me. Yes, responded Doran Bolt. But then you weren't there for the other years. Back then, he didn't say guilds. He said legal guilds. We aren't the only one to notice that, added Byakuya. I've been checking the reports for the past 2 months since he made the announcement, and I came to one solid conclusion. The dark guilds have been unnaturally quiet. All the encounters were due to Fairy Tail engaging in combat with them and allowing them to be found and captured. And yet none of the usual chaos they might want to cause has happened. And so they also believe as you do, said Makarov as the true meaning behind the words hit him. Any guild can participate. Even dark guilds. Is he a fool? Gildarts practically shouted as he jumped out of his seat, the chair shattering to pieces as he accidentally destroyed it. He must understand the chaos that would inevitably follow allowing dark guilds into Crocus. Exactly, said a new voice, everyone turning in shock as Kisuk stood leaning against the doorway. That must mean the little king has run out of time and is having to act very desperately. Protector of the Fairies. Aoesu watched as Ichigo dodged another of the Asachi, barely able to get away from its grasp. Another lunged at him from behind to grab Ichigo by his chest, but Ichigo managed to break free before any of the others could get a grip on him, swinging round his sealed Zanpakuto as fast as he could. The blade sliced through the Asachi before the damage was instantly healed, returning the Asachi to an unharmed state. To your left. Ichigo listened to the voice, leaving Aoesu to watch in amusement as Ichigo avoided a group of 3 Asachi that had been sneaking up on him. His eyes would occasionally leave Ichigo to move towards the girl hanging off his shoulders, being almost thrown off with how fast Ichigo was having to spin round to counter more Asachi. He hadn't bothered calling out to her yet. He hadn't known she had been there to start with. It seemed like she had hidden herself within Ichigo for a while, but now she was out and warning him of attacks he couldn't see. He'd call it cheating, but the very fact she could hide within his soul meant it wasn't. It had been amusing though when he had called out to her. Mavis Vermilion. He knew that girl. How could he not? He had been there when he had met that man, the girl hiding behind her creator in a form almost similar to his own Asachi, yet another link he had come to recognize in magic and its connection back to the source. He wondered if she even remembered that time. Probably not, considering she didn't even seem to recognize him. It was so long ago, but then who knew how much time had passed for her? He did at least get to have a nice little chat with her. Thought it was more her shouting insults at him for putting her Ichigo through all of this. He could see the suspicion in her eyes. She wanted to know why he could see her, and he really couldn't be bothered to explain it to her right now. If Ichigo died here, there would be no reason to. And she probably knew that just as well as he did. How long was left? About 12 hours? That sounded right. The Asachi would all stop at that time anyway, so he'd know either way whether Ichigo would have passed at the last second or if he had failed. He's going to fail, stated Mera as she stood beside Aoesu. Just look at him. He's not even trying to understand. Isn't the answer obvious? You are a Zanpakuto, Mera, Aoesu stated kindly. He is not. He doesn't understand how it works, and neither does any Shinigami in the beginning. I'd be more lenient and give more clues if he was anyone else, but I don't dare for him. Kisuke Urahara is playing a dangerous game, and for once I'm not keen on joining in and placing my own bets. Do you remember what happened the last time a hybrid existed? Do you think Kisuke even knows about that event? Why would he? He's foolish. Maybe my lovely little Mera. But then that's what makes his princess love him so much. Benihime can be such a spoiled brat at times, but at least he gives her plenty of entertainment to keep her from getting bored. Mera shrugged, continuing to look at Ichigo with a bored expression. That was until black energy burst out from Ichigo's blade and it all changed, blanketing Ichigo in a cocoon of black magic. It suddenly snapped out as it formed a black cloak around him, piercing 20 Asachi at once. The sword that slashed out, however, was broken near the hilt, only a small amount of a large blade left. The small glimpse she got at his face and the half-mask over his face made her shiver, especially as the cloak continued to lash out alongside a clawed hand. I can't understand, she muttered in almost fear. I can see how he might have constructed a fake blade. I can see how he might have made it change form. But I can't comprehend how he's able to fight like this. All the Asachi on the group had doubled their effects, but they were still getting swept away. He's this powerful without even have ever used a Zanpakuto? Is it even safe to give him one? At this rate he'll defeat all the Asachi without passing. There lies the problem, muttered Aoesu in sadness. My Asachi cannot handle the power of a Bankai. They simply aren't powerful enough in this state, even if they can become anything. The Asachi on the ground quickly created blades from their arms, but they still got knocked back by the fierce attacks from Ichigo. I don't think he even realizes how serious it is for him to be doing what he is doing. I underestimated the Quincy side of him. I didn't think he'd even call forth his Bankai with how confused he is currently, so I let him keep his blade. And yet it seems I misunderstood the scale of strength that power has. You mean dash? Yes. He did not call forth his Bankai. It called itself forth. Mera crossed her arms. What will you do if this keeps up then? Will you kill him? I'll have no choice. Because if I don't make him a blade, he'll die anyway. I can be merciful. Aoesu held out his hands in front of him, letting small amounts of magic wrap around them. I really don't want it to come to that. Not when that man is still out there. I feel like we'd need every single person we can get our hands on to halt his ambitions. Aoesu let the magic faded before glancing back down in the pit. It looks like it'll all be over soon anyway. I don't think he'll understand. Go get Sayabu's ready. I may need it soon if this continues. Mera nodded, leaving Aoesu to watch patiently. Down in the hole, Ichigo kept fighting, listening to Mavis's call-outs as she spotted enemies. Everything felt wrong. Each time he swung out at the Asachi, he could tell he was doing something wrong. But he didn't know what. What confused him the most right now as well was why his Bankai had appeared. He had been focusing on defending against their attacks as he tried to think, but, even so, his Bankai had materialized around him against his will. He didn't want to use it. Not after everything he knew. It felt wrong. And he knew he shouldn't feel like that, but he did. How could he rely on someone who had been lying to him all this time? The Asachi suddenly attacked more viciously and the cloak snapped out at them against his own accord. Why? Why was it doing that? It wasn't like Byakuya's Bankai where the man's defense was a response to his thoughts. This happened whether he wanted it to or not, and he couldn't argue against it. He had to end this soon as well. The Asachi were slowly being defeated, even he could see that, but if it was possible to do this, then why would that give him the answer he was meant to find? It had to be simpler than that. Something he was missing. What had Aoyasu said? To consider which was superior? That was it. The Zanpakuto or the Shinigami? That was what he couldn't understand. The Shinigami was the one who wielded the Zanpakuto, but that didn't make him superior to it. A Zanpakuto liked its wielder to be worthy before it gave away his power, but the fact they would give it to them destroyed the notion of them being superior to. Then what? What was the answer? Weren't they meant to be a team? The Asachi suddenly increased their attacks against him. It kept happening randomly, but it always interrupted him. He was thinking. Always when he considered the nature of the two. Were they helping him? It was like every time he went down the wrong route they would try and tell him it was all wrong. But then what was the relationship if not to be teammates or partners? As much as he hated to admit it, Zanjitsu, or who had pretended to be Zanjitsu, had helped him. Was that wrong? Even now it was like Zanjitsu was in sync with his own will, protecting him. It was like... Wait. Was it really that simple? All this time? He froze, but he wasn't the only one. The Asachi themselves were hesitatingly, almost looking at him expectantly. The cloak around him was about to lash out when he suddenly shouted out. Stop. The cloak froze in its tracks, Mavis looking up at Ichigo with a knowing smile. Did you finally work it out? Did you already know? Mavis nodded. Of course I did. But I couldn't exactly tell you. That would ruin what Aoyasu is trying to teach you. I know, said Ichigo before his Bankai faded away. His Bankai had been here because he wanted to block their attacks. He wanted to defend himself from them. His Bankai had responded to his will and come forth because of that, even if he hadn't voiced that command to himself, and it had been Zanjitsu that did it for him. Part of him had welcomed that assistance. He slowly stepped forward towards the Asachi as they all started to bow before him, glancing upwards to see Aoyasu looking at him in surprise. I understand no. He slowly turned back to the Asachi before his eyes came to rest on a single one that he walked towards. He held out his hand towards the Asachi and it quickly gripped his own, its black skin turning white along with a hollow mask appearing on its face and white hair styled just like his on its head. You're the one. Aoyasu looked between Ichigo and the changed Asachi for a few moments before smiling. So you learned it then? Fine, I'll keep my part of the deal. Aoyasu raised a hand before pointing at the changed Asachi. Bring it here. I'll personally forge it for you. Protector of the Fairies. Quilge walked out as confidently as he could from the throne room, trying not to let the bandages impede his process. The door shut silently behind him and revealed as nod from the shadows. Well. His Majesty is happy with our progress, stated Quilge simply, despite our failure in capturing Ichigo Kurosaki. He was lenient. He feels I have already been punished enough through my failures for the both of us. He is happy however with the insinuations I have left with Fairy Tail. He feels that it will prove amusing for the time being. We should return then. I am sure Shunsui suspects something. That man has always been cautious of us. He never trusted us from day one. But we have a bit of time. We have not been gone for long and it is easy to return as well. Well, said an arrogant voice, causing Quilge to frown in annoyance as an arm was slung over his shoulders. What mess did you get into? As these burns. An annoying beast. One that I underestimated. My wounds will heal however thanks to His Majesty. What do you want, Bazby? The red-haired Mohawk Quincy smirked at the annoyance he was causing before letting a small blue flame appear over a single finger on his right hand. Just thought I'd come and hear what you and does not have been getting up to. Not all of us are allowed to act as we want all the time. And not all of us are valuable enough to get away with running around freely at times too like Bambietta is. Are you jealous? Asked Quilge smugly, noticing how tense the man got. I thought you were above such petty things. Watch it. With the state you are in right now, I could kill you without even needing to use even half my full power. And how would His Majesty react, I wonder? Would he find your actions as amusing as you might find them? Basby slowly released Quilge. It seems you have realized the answer. What's going on here? Asked a long-haired blonde man as he approached the three Quincy, all of them instantly freezing in their arguing at the man's strict tone. The man had no visible weapons that they could see due to the long white cloak he wore, but they all knew no Quincy was ever truly unarmed. Nothing, said Basby hesitantly. Just having a little chat here. Well, please move it on, the man said, his tone leaving no room to debate. His Majesty no longer expects any of you, so I must ask you all to leave to avoid disturbing His Majesty. All right already, said Basby. We're leaving. Basby waited until the three were out of sight of the man before swearing. Damn Jugram. Careful now, stated Quilge. Jugram Hashwalth is His Majesty's right-hand man. It is wise not to upset him lest he report the incident to His Majesty. I know already. Doesn't mean I have to like him though. Basby crossed his arms before smirking. Get back to your little job then. If you encounter any fun, then make sure you call me. I'll handle them all easily, and I'd love a chance to let loose for once. Get authorization from His Majesty and I will not complain about your appearance. Until then, however, keep out of our way. Quilge stormed off as proudly as he could, with his nod slowly trailing after him. Basby sighed before leaning against one of the white pillars of the large building they were all in. You had fun, Bambietta. The black-haired girl simply sneered as she stepped out of one of the shadows of the pillars, putting a hand on her mini-skirt at her waist. None of your business, chickenhead. Basby snarled at her. You want to fight? No thanks. I doubt you could even give me much entertainment. Besides, I'm tired now anyway. And where have you been? You didn't take the shadows when you left. You been stalking me? Bambietta shrugged. Whatever. I got bored, so thought I'd go on a little road trip. Sometimes I don't want the instant path like some people. And does His Majesty know you left? Bambietta shrugged again. He probably does. And he probably doesn't care either. So long as I don't cause too many problems, then I can run around as much as I want and do whatever I want. Maybe if you become strong enough, then you could do the same, but you're far too weak to have that chance. All bark and no bite. Blue flames of magic burst around Basby's right hand. Want to test that little theory? Bambietta smirked before walking off. How about you become a bit stronger first of all? Maybe then I'll consider you a challenge. Basby let the flames die out as she walked around a corner, slamming a fist against the pillar he was resting against. He hated the boredom in times like this. He wanted action, not simply being kept cooped up waiting. Soon. He just had to be patient. Then he'd finally get to have some fun. His Majesty wouldn't be able to deny him that then. Protector of the Fairies. The blade is me. Taking the lead, Aoesu led Ichigo down a long flight of stairs, the Asachi following after them along with Mera and Mavis, the latter still hanging off Ichigo's shoulders. Frowning at how long they had been walking for, Ichigo finally spoke up in an annoyed tone. So where are we going? Down. You already said that. Did I, Ichi? Well, just a bit further down now. Come on, lighten up. Got to build up the suspense. I would have made us take the slide, but I thought this would make it all seem more epic. Ichigo sighed. What about Kisuk then? Where the hell did he go? At least answer me that. Aoesu was silent for a moment. I kicked him out. There's meant to be a bit of privacy when it comes to personal stuff like this. Making a Zanpakuto don't need observers, yo. It needs the one forging it and the one wielding it. You kicked him out. The disbelief must have been apparent on Ichigo's face as Aoesu showed a mock outraged look on his face. You hurt me, Ichi. Do you really think of me to be so weak? I don't. But I don't think Kisuk is weak either. Well, that's certainly true. That man is a genius. To think he created someone like you is a massive achievement, and what he made before then makes his work even more impressive. And, even after all that, he is still human. He's not like you and I. Like us. Exactly. Aoesu waved a hand in creating a tracing pattern of light in the air from the magic around him. Magic's favorites, the candidates to be rulers or world changers, we are ones who, for some reason or another, magic decided to help more than any other. So if Wendy was to look at you, she'd see some kind of strange reaction to the magic around you. If that little girl uses sky magic, then sure she would. The few who used that magic are like shamans or priests and priestesses. Long ago they were extremely respected for that power. It was also how they could identify someone with untold amounts of potential. I should know, I was one of those they found around 400 years ago. 400. Hold on, are you saying you're dash? I look dashing for my age, don't I? Aoesu's face took on a serious expression as he stopped and turned to look at Ichigo. I'd like it if you keep some of what I tell you a secret, if you would. What I say to you is said as equals in the eyes of magic, and not for the ears of someone like Kisukira Hara. He's not a bad man, but he's far too noisy for his own good. All right, agreed Ichigo, Aoesu turning back to his usual self and continuing to walk downwards. But how are you still alive after so long? It's not that hard honestly, though it wasn't intentional back then. I don't age as you would expect. My deeds back then, with the creation of the Zanpakuto, made me immortalized in magic size, and as such I continue to exist even now. A form of immortality based on an ideal. I'm not the only one. You'll find a few others like myself scattered throughout the world. So long as no one kills us, then we'll probably just continue living as we have been, though in my case I'd probably get reborn or something. The creation of the Zanpakuto is a pretty important event and one magic would probably want to keep around. I'm the only one who knows how to make them in the end, and I don't plan on sharing that secret anytime soon. Hold on, said Ichigo, raising a hand to cut Aoesu off. You created the Zanpakuto? What about before then? I'm sure Shinigami were around before that point. Trust me, back then magic wasn't as diverse as it is now. But you aren't wrong, Shinigami were around even before then. It's one of the oldest branches of magic out there. In the early stages, however, it wasn't what it was nowadays. You had your Kadu and Shunpo and other techniques, but the method of releasing the power of your soul was unknown to then. Any that did so did it at great personal cost to themselves. It was why the Zanpakuto was created. To allow a mage to transmit the power of their soul into a weapon. Ichigo frowned. You say mage, not Shinigami. Exactly. The great truth of the Zanpakuto is that it is not a blade that only a Shinigami can use. The Shinigami are the ones who get the greatest benefit rather because of the nature of their souls. So does that mean you've made a blade for someone else who wasn't a Shinigami before? Ichigo heard Meryl let out a gasp of shock behind him as Aoesu froze, the moment quickly passing as Aoesu continued like nothing was wrong. When he spoke, however, his voice was much quieter than before, as if he was seeing the past before his eyes. Once. Master Dash. It's okay, Mera. I don't mind telling him. He came to me 400 years ago, all battered and bruised but still with a small shred of hope in his eyes. He asked me for my help. He wanted a weapon capable of saving people. I never asked why. I never did back then. I see into the souls of people, you see. I get a glimpse at what I need to do to realize it into a material form, and I couldn't help but comply with his request. His eyes were so sincere with what he wanted. He truly wanted to save people. I assume it didn't go so well. No, it didn't. But that's the past. Again, I must ask you to not share any of this. Not even your teacher understands the nature of a Zanpakuto as a weapon of anyone's soul rather than simply a weapon of a Shinigami's soul. Hey, I promised, didn't I? Good, good. Just checking. Any other questions before we reach the forge? The Aoesu answer booth is open for business. Ichigo glanced at Mavis, noticing how Aoesu followed his gaze. You can see her, right? She said you could. Aoesu nodded his head towards Mavis. I can see you, lovely little lady friend. How? No one I know could see her, and yet they could see someone who is just like her. Really? Aoesu scratched his head. Well, they probably saw the other one because that being would have been willing to expend a lot more of its magic to allow visibility. I would take a guess that the reason Mavis stays invisible to all but you and me is that she didn't have much magic before, and now that she's linked to you she doesn't want to be too much of a drain on your own reserves. Ichigo froze. How do you know she's linked to me? I can see it. Anyone like us can, so long as they've gone to the Holy Palace. Once you've awakened, reality becomes visible for the first time. That's why I can see her even in such a low visibility state. I have the capability to see the world of magic in its truest form, and so even her form is visible to me. You could have asked me, said Mavis in protest as she tapped Ichigo on the head. I can explain any stuff like that to you much better than he can. I'll even add this on to top him. Ziref could see me. Aoesu stiffened as he glanced at in wide eyes. Ziref? He's still alive. Mavis nodded, causing Aoesu to slump slightly against the wall. I see. It seems that man is still alive after all this time. I had my suspicions but I was never truly sure. That's right, said Ichigo in realization. You were alive during his time. Of course I was. I never ran into him much during his little reign of terror, but I still remember the state of the world back then, and he's strong enough to push us back into a state like that. I'd be wary of him. Wherever he is one of the most deadly people to ever exist, even by my standards. Anything else Ichigo might have wanted to ask was cut off as Aoesu darted forward, entering a bright doorway to reveal a large open space before them all. Ah, here we are. Welcome to my forge. Ichigo wandered in with wide eyes, taking in where they were. It seemed to be a large cliff with massive waterfalls on all sides of the rest of the cavern they were in. Aoesu strode forward before snapping his fingers. Everyone. It's starting, yo. Let's start the show. 4 figures suddenly fell from above, each lashing out at Aoesu with a limb before Mera rushed forward and joined in as well, kicking the man to the ground as the 5 girls stood upon him. A blonde-haired girl with 2 long pigtails immediately shouted out, "The Nimeiya bodyguards have arrived." Ichigo looked on in shock, and he wasn't the only one, Mavis and even the Asachi having similar reactions. Aoesu locked eyes with the Asachi before holding out a hand. What are you spacing out for over there? When I said everyone, you're included too, Asachi. The Asachi's shape suddenly shifted into a bright beam of white energy, shooting towards Aoesu and stabbing into the ground in front of him. Mera quickly slapped her knuckles against one another before taking a deep breath and releasing a stream of fire from her mouth. The flames impacted on the energy and wrapped around the nearby area. Watching the flames spiral around, a black-haired girl joined in on the efforts as she began generating water from her palms as she poured it into a channel created by a smaller childlike girl. The blonde-haired girl's pigtails meanwhile reached out towards the Asachi and grabbed it, holding it in place for Aoesu in the flames. The last girl, one who had the lower half of her face hidden by bandages, reached for those same bandages and grabbed a tooth in her mouth before ripping it out. She quickly took it into her hands and molded it into a large black hammer before presenting it to Aoesu. As all this went on, Aoesu patiently waited as he tied up his hair and removed his glasses. He slowly took the hammer from the Zanpakuta spirit before standing in front of his created forge. Well then. I think it's time to begin. With a big swing, Aoesu brought the hammer down on the Asachi. Each time he did so, the flames rose higher before dropping back down. Ichigo watched carefully, Aoesu finally speaking up after sensing the gaze on his back for a while now. What you thinking about, Ichi? It's nothing. Just should you have taken those glasses of yours off? What kind of question is that? How can I see the color of the flames if my view gets distorted? I need to be able to see every little detail perfectly. I see. Aren't you going to ask anything else? Like why your Asachi looks like a hollow? You know about that then, muttered Ichigo. I can see into your soul. I know enough about the composition of your power. I know the truth. The hollow inside me, he's the one who was meant to become my Zanpakuto. Then you know about the one who's been acting all this time then? Yes, Ichigo replied solemnly. I know. All right. That's the easy part then. In order to make this blade, I'm going to send you to your inner world. You need to draw out your power ready to latch onto the blade, and we can't do that without your full Shinigami powers. Go in and get them back. Protector of the Fairies. Ichigo opened his eyes to come face to face with a view he remembered perfectly well. The large tilted skyscrapers greeted him silently as he began to stroll across the glass, sparing a glance upwards at the unfamiliar sky of his world. He didn't remember those golden lights being there, and he chose to stop looking before they drew him in any further. They were probably to do with Mavis anyway. He didn't have to walk far, his subconscious knowing exactly where to let his feet carry him to. He stood at the edge of the large skyscraper before glancing downwards. Without any sign of hesitation, he threw himself down, not bothering to control his descent into the void below. He hadn't even been falling for 5 seconds when he was knocked to one side, crashing through one of the lower skyscrapers before coming to rest on another as the previous one crumpled and fell. The sound of footsteps filled the emptiness of his world as the man he had known would appear showed himself. "So you showed yourself," muttered Ichigo as he pushed himself up. "Get out of my way." Zanjitsu shook his head as he stared Ichigo down. "I'm afraid I cannot allow this, Ichigo. I think you misunderstand the situation, Zanjitsu. I'm not leaving here without the real Zanjitsu. I won't let you stop me. This is not a request for you to move but a demand. And this is exactly why I cannot let you pass," said the impostor. "I have worked hard to seal Zanjitsu away, to protect you from his influence. If I don't get him back, then I will die." "No, that's not entirely correct, since I never truly had him in the first place. You took everything from him. Even his own identity." The impostor's gaze grew harsh. "I did what was necessary." "What was necessary? Or what you wanted? You may hate me for this, Ichigo, but I will ensure you will be kept safe. I may not be Zanjitsu, but I have always stood by the reason for my existence. To protect you. Protect me." Ichigo let out a laugh. "You're the reason I'm dying. The more you awaken my Quincy side and suppress the hollow aspect of me, the more conflict that takes place in my soul. The alternative would have you becoming a true Shinigami, and I can never allow that." "Why?" The impostor kept silent. "Why is it so important that I don't become a Shinigami? Is your hatred for Shinigami so large because of your Quincy nature? Do you hate me, Zanjitsu?" "No. I could never hate you, Ichigo. And it is for this reason I seek other solutions." The impostor swung an arm out and let a small blade of energy generate in his hands. He brought up his other hand and generated a mask just like that of a hollow's. With another swish of his hands, the constructs vanished. "Do you see? Even as I took away power, I still tried to make up for it. You wanted a blade to fight with, so I made you one. I even acted like a real Zanpakuto so you could feel happy. And when I saw the devastation and pain that Hollow caused because of Nirvana, along with the pain you felt from such an experience, I knew I couldn't just sit still and do nothing. So I began to seal him and all your Hollow powers away and pushed more of myself forward." Zanjitsu brought up a hand again and pointed at himself. "I realized the pain I was causing you, and that is why I can't back down now. Enough time and I will absorb the remainder of your Shinigami powers forever, and I will ensure you will never become a Shinigami. I will seal that essence of yourself within my own power. Doing this will ensure you will never die because of that power. You will become a Quincy like you should have always been. Like your Daedalus self was. You're capable of absorbing my Shinigami powers." Ichigo asked in shock. "But Kisuke said dash. He did not take into account those 7 years. You still were functioning on a magical level, and I was conscious all the time. Once I suppressed Zanjitsu enough, I was able to start the filtering of his power into myself. 1 more week and I will be able to fully absorb him. I thought Shinigami powers and Quincy powers didn't mix. You underestimate the power you were born with. The power I represent. It was only when Kisuke Urahara stabbed you with his Zanpakuto that I was capable of creating a Zanpakuto for you. It was only during your encounter with Wendy Marvel and her ability to see magic that you started to awaken your ability to absorb magic from that outside source, despite never having trained in such practices before. It was only after your hollow was let loose enough that I was able to create a substitute mask for you to wield and to use to enhance your absorption capabilities. And it was only during your battle with your Edala's self that I learned how to manifest magic strings to make your body to move beyond your normal limits. You see, the impostor added, I represent the power to absorb all living things and energies and to incorporate it into your own soul. I am the Quincy power you were gifted at your birth, no even before then. And that is why I will be the one to protect you, even if I have to separate you from the power you once relied on. Ichigo stared at the impostor critically before adding, but his influence won't easily abandon me, will it? The impostor flinched, but Ichigo kept going. Even when you triggered my Bankai, Zanjutsu was still present within it. Those clawed hands and the mask were his own, not fakes you created. His hollow powers still ran through my veins in that form. A Bankai is the release of every part of yourself. Even I can't suppress him completely just yet in that state. No, it is rather he refuses to let himself be suppressed. Ichigo took a deep breath, closing his eyes as he smiled. I can hear him. He's calling out to me. He's asking me to call on him, even now after all these years. I ignored him for so long, and yet he still patiently waits. I really don't deserve such a patient spirit, but perhaps I do as well. Because he is me and I am him. Ichigo opened his eyes and leveled a harsh gaze at Zanjutsu. What will you do then? Will you absorb me too to remove his influence completely? Will you take my own place to ensure that part of me can't ever reach up again? Will you suppress me next? No. Never you. I do all of this for you. And yet you also cut me down. Some people probably wondered what part of my soul the hollow represented. They liked to think it was the dark side of myself. But no. That hollow, Zanjutsu, he's the side of me that loves to fight, but he's also the part of me that will endure and wait patiently for long as he needs to. The part of me that would let me cut down my enemies without hesitation, the part that would have me remove anyone who is a threat, that's not him. That's you. I've heard enough. In one swift moment, Ichigo shot past Zanjutsu, using the man's shock to his advantage. Not wanting to wait to give the old man a chance to react, Ichigo threw himself back down into the void. He only had a few seconds head start when Zanjutsu shot down after him, determination in his eyes in his goal to stop him. Ichigo glanced back at him before he let his body get enveloped in energy, his Bankai forming around him. The cloak made to restrict him, but Ichigo ripped it off him, for the first time being able to disengage it from his body. His hollow limbs allowed him to amplify his speed beyond what the man behind him could match, especially as he threw back a hastily constructed zero to distract the man. Zanjutsu was forced to halt and raise a hand against the beam, gripping the air tightly to stop himself getting flung back as he forced the energy to part around him. Stop. Ichigo didn't listen, shooting down to the deepest part of his inner world, the place where he knew Zanjutsu was being held. He hit the ground hard, but he didn't even feel the pain, instead rushing towards the figure trapped under swords. He was right above the man when Zanjutsu landed in front of him, the impostor's grip over his own on the sword he was trying to remove. I won't let you do this, Ichigo. Then cut me down. Kill me and stop me from releasing him. Ichigo. The impostor clenched his other hand. Please, listen to me. You don't need him. I've been with you for years. Am I not enough? Ichigo's gaze softened for a second. You've been by my side for a long time, even if I don't agree with everything you did. Despite how angry I might appear, I do appreciate what you did for me. But I can't let you do this. With a strong pull, Ichigo wrenched the sword out of the hollow below him, the impostor's own strength no match for the amplified power Ichigo had with his Bankai. The hollow's eyes snapped open before he lunged at Ichigo. He was inches from Ichigo, Zanjutsu shouting out a warning when Ichigo spoke. Zanjutsu. The hollow froze. Its expression rapidly shifted as it regained its intelligence before a large smile appeared on his face. So you finally realized the truth, King. Your loyal horse awaits your command now that you've finally climbed on board. You. The impostor summoned up a large sword of energy before swinging it down at Zanjutsu. Before it could even hit, Ichigo was there blocking it, holding the broken form of his Bankai's blade. Despite the power behind Zanjutsu's blade, however, it couldn't break through the broken blade. Zanjutsu instead reached forward and grabbed Ichigo, throwing him to one side and lunging at him. Why? Why would you choose him? Why? Am I not good enough? Am I not strong enough? What did I do wrong? Ichigo used his blade to deflect the blows as he continued to stare down Zanjitsu as he attacked. Each attack from the old man came that much closer to him, but he didn't look even the least bit concerned. What was I meant to do? You were meant to be mine. You were meant to use me to fight. I waited years for that moment. Why did you choose to become a Shinigami? Why did you choose to deny being a Quincy? Why didn't you choose me? As Zanjitsu stabbed forward, his eyes widened as he saw Ichigo release his grip on his sword, not even bothering to dodge, and Zanjitsu knew he couldn't pull back in time. Ichigo's sword hit the ground with a clank as another blade stabbed into his chest. Zanjitsu felt his hands shake as he gripped the blade. No. I didn't mean to. I don't want to dash. I see it now, muttered Ichigo, reaching a hand out to the blade and brushing a hand along it, the energy making up the blade not even harming him despite being stabbed into him. I understand perfectly now. Everything you've done, it isn't because you wanted me to not be a Shinigami. The truth is, you wanted to be a Zanpakuto. You wanted to be the one to help me, to stand by my side and help me fight my battles. Ichigo looked at the blade before looking back at Zanjitsu. Zanjitsu. Would you mind? The sound of laughter filled their ears before another sword stabbed into Ichigo from behind him. Zanjitsu let out a cry of fear as he tried to grab Zanjitsu, but Ichigo stopped him before he could even reach the Zanpakuto. His blade feels just like yours, you know? You've been focusing for so long on suppressing everything Shinigami that I don't think you even realized it yourself. Realized it? Realized what? When Kisuke gave me hollow powers to save my life, I don't think that the only thing that happened was that they bonded with my Shinigami side. I believe those same Shinigami powers bonded to you too. I didn't even realize it myself until down against those Asachi. You envied Zanjitsu, but I see now that both your blades are just different sides of the same one. Zanjitsu, he's not just him. You're him too. The two of you form Zanjitsu. Me? You mean? You aren't abandoning me? After everything I did? Don't get it wrong, I'm pretty pissed off with you right now. Ichigo raised hand before giving the man a smile. But everyone makes mistakes. Everyone deserves a second chance. That's almost like the fairy tale motto at times. So why don't I be the one to extend that hand out to you? Besides, I can't truly come to hate you. You are me. And if that is the wrong thing to do, who cares about stuff like that? I've been led along by so many people for years now. Even if this ends up being wrong, I'll still do it. This is my choice, and I choose to not let you disappear. The man smiled before he slowly took Ichigo's hand. All around the three, a massive burst of blue energy appeared, Ichigo looking worried for a second before the old man shook away his fears. Have no fear. I am simply returning what I should never have taken. It is yours, and it always will be from now on. He's right, King, said Zanjitsu from behind him. Me and the old guy will have words down here, but for now, get out of here. Forge us. I want to be used in battle for the first time in my true form. I want the chance to experience the feeling of blood falling on me as I cleave through our enemies. Go get us. I'll be back, said Ichigo before he vanished. The Hollow and the old man looked at one another for a moment before the Hollow cracked his knuckles. Well then, time to start that payback. 7 years, I think. I can ignore the years before that. Don't worry, I'll be much more merciful than you were. Maybe. Protector of the Fairies. Aoyasu knew instantly when Ichigo returned to the real world, allowing Ichigo to pass as he shoved his hands into the flames in front of him. Hey! Shouted the Zanpakuto next to him in warning. Are you an idiot? Do you want to burn yourself? Don't worry about him, cut in Aoyasu before she could shout anymore. He's found his resolve. He's found his strength. Raising the hammer up again, Aoyasu slammed it down on the forming blade. All that's left is to take that part of him and forge it into the weapon it is meant to be. Zanjitsu, Ichigo muttered, his hands holding the forming metal even as it continuously shifted. He could feel the essence of his power flowing into the blade and he allowed it all to flow. His hollow mask manifested on his face before it was sucked into the flames as specks of energy. The quincy crosses around his wrist glowed as well before breaking apart, the fragments fusing into the blade even as Aoesu kept hammering away at the metal. "I see you realized it," he said as he kept up his work. "What your Zanpakuto had to become. You've managed to use those hollow powers of yours for a while now, but to use all three, it needs to be truly united. The energy of a hollow and the energy of a quincy, all wrapped up nice and neatly in the casing of the power of a Shinigami." With a final slam, Aoesu raised the hammer back up and let it rest over his shoulders. "All right, I'm done. Why don't you show us all the finished form of that Zanpakuto? Show us Zanjutsu." With a swift moment, Ichigo pulled his hands out of the fire, his Zanpakuto clenched tightly in his hands. The moment it left the flames, every bit of water in the nearby vicinity vanished, the intense heat caused by the forging requiring every last drop in order to cool the blades back down. Aoesu let out a whistle in amusement before glancing at Ichigo's Zanpakuto. "I've made a lot of blades, but I think that's going to be one of my favorites. I don't even see any flaws in it." "Flaws? You normally make flaws in your blades." "I can't help it. I don't know how you lot will turn out. It's the whole reason a Bankai shatters. Because I didn't make it without creating some form of structural weakness. Reforging the blade removes those impurities that I accidentally made, hence why I always say that the blade they will get will never be the same as before it was broken. Just don't let anyone know that I actually make it stronger than before, else everyone won't care any longer in the condition of their Zanpakuto. I don't repair blades broken by stupidity like that." Ichigo frowned as he glanced at his Zanpakuto. "So why does mine lack that? You've been a Shinigami for a long time now. At least 10 years I'd say, but I could be off in that regard. Either way, you've growth stronger and learned, and you already managed to unlock the power of Bankai to reveal those old potential faults to me. It's the first time I ever forged a new blade with a bit of a blueprint in my head of the end result. So then, what do you think? Are you happy with those Zanjutsus?" Ichigo raised each of the two blades in his hands as he examined each one of them. The blade in his left was smaller than the other, about the length of his arm. It resembled a trench knife in a lot of ways, more so than an actual sword. It also reminded him a lot of the old form of his Shikai. The handle of the actual blade was enclosed at the bottom of the blade, a handguard edge of blade covering it. In this right hand, the blade was a lot like a kyber knife and also seemed a lot like the blade the hollow part of Zanjutsu had used long ago. This blade was more like the length of his original Shikai, a small area to grip at the base of the blade before it extended back at a length roughly half his forearm, along with getting thicker than the grip point too. From the middle of the blade, a small hollowed-out area ran along near the back edge until it reached the base where his hand was. Like the other blade, both were pure black from top to bottom, and he knew what part of him was in each blade. His quincy side in his left hand, his hollow side in his right. "They're perfect," muttered Ichigo, enjoying the feeling of both blade in his hands. It felt perfect, more so than it ever had before. "So this is what you truly are, Zanjutsu. Impressed? That's you after all. The you meant to fight." "I know." Ichigo gripped the blades before looking around curiously when he realized something. Not to bother you, but how exactly do I carry these blades around? The old sheath I had seems to have been destroyed and I can't seem to tell Zanjutsu to leave Shikai. You think you can even seal it away anymore?" Aoesu let out a large laugh as he gripped his sides. "That's hilarious. Bit too late if you wanted to do that now. You haven't noticed the difference, have you? In the power you're releasing. What do you dash?" "Sir!" shouted Mistogen as he and Nozomi suddenly appeared, the faint energy of Nozomi's magic quickly vanishing. "Are you okay?" Ichigo glanced at the two in shock. "What are you guys dash? I wasn't really expecting that much magic to be released when you finally got your power back," explained Aoesu. "It short-circuited the barriers and they are only just repairing. That's why I'll be surprised if you find a way to even seal those blades of yours back into a sealed state." Ichigo frowned, even as he tried to ignore Mistogen and Nozomi's fussing and complaints about him not sending any word to them in the past 2 to 3 days. "So I can't sort out some way to carry them?" Bit of a difficult process to lug two large threatening blades everything. And no, Miss Doggin, you aren't carrying them, Ichigo tacked on at the end as he saw Miss Doggin try to speak. Oh, Zanjitsu will sort that out for you. Your Shikai had some form of marking, didn't it? Yeah, but how did you know? Never mind. I'm not surprised you know considering who you are. Aoesu smirked. Now you're getting it. Leave it to Zanjitsu, they'll provide you with the means. Aoesu quickly shot a glance at the two by Ichigo. Sorry to ruin the parade, but would you two mind waiting upstairs? We'll be there shortly. Nozomi frowned before looking at Ichigo. Only when she got a nod to agree did she take Miss Doggin and vanish through one of her portals. Aoesu let out a sigh as he watched her magic in action. I can't say I don't envy such magic. Extremely useful, even if I have a version of my own. Nowhere near as flexible though. You sent them away purposely, didn't you? Of course. I figured I'd ask you what you plan to do now. Ichigo glanced down at Zanjitsu. It was only when I confronted Zanjitsu did I decide. Kisuke didn't show up here with the others. Is he anywhere nearby? Aoesu's smirk grew wider. I don't sense the man anywhere. How odd. He must have gone to do things and plans to return later on when he believes you would be done. Good. I'm leaving then. I thought so. Why, I must ask though. Surely he will have news for you. Ichigo shook his head. That's all the more reason to go. I have things I need to do, and I will never have a better chance than now. If Kisuke appears, I won't do them. I know I won't, because he'll tell me things that will end up changing my choices, and towards something he has planned. I can't do that anymore. I can't be manipulated like that. My choices, from now on, they'll be my own. Even if they are the wrong ones. Ichigo nodded. Zanjitsu asked the same from me. I'll tell you something similar to what I told him. Even if it ends up being wrong, I won't waste time on what could have been or what I should have done. I'll move forward even if my choices cause me to make mistakes, because in the end those choices are still mine. Aoesu nodded himself before giving him a brief clap, Mavis doing the same as she jumped from her resting point nearby onto Ichigo's shoulders, sparing an interested glance at the two blades. So where are you going? She asked curiously. Magnolia. Nice try. Ah. But dash. Not yet, Mavis, Ichigo said as he cut her off. I'll take you there, but there are things to do first. I'm going to find the Holy Palace. I could tell you if you want, offered Aoesu. Its location, I mean. No. I appreciate your generosity, especially considering your attitude towards me originally, but I have to find it on my own. Like the others before me. Good answer. Aoesu thought to himself for a moment before he raised an arm and pointed at it. I'll let you know this at least so you don't waste time looking. All doors have keys, but those doors require special keys. Us. Our bodies have the trace of magic on them. We are Oken, the keys to the world no one else can enter. Approach the doors and they will open, no matter what. Ichigo slowly lowered himself to a bow. Thank you, Aoesu. For everything. No problem. Aoesu snapped his fingers as a portal opened up next to Ichigo. That'll take you 500 miles west. Might be in the right direction, might be in the wrong direction, you'll have to decide on that. Make sure you come back to visit one day. I'll be curious to see what decisions you come to after you visit that place. It changes us all, and once you go in there you'll never be the same again. I know, said Ichigo as he stepped through the portal. With a snap of his fingers, Aoesu both shut the portal and had Nozomi and Miss Doggin kicked out of his house, having them thrown in the opposite direction to Ichigo. They'd probably meet up with Kisuke again if he had left with her portals, but it would give Ichigo some time to make it to the Holy Palace if he worked out the route. You were hesitant before, said Mera as she walked up to him. But now you feel so much more confident. I saw his soul when I made that blade, just like with any other person I make a Zanpakuto for. I can't come to suspect him when I now know the kind of person he is. What about us? The barrier came down and they must have sensed Ichigo's magical power. People will come to investigate. He will come to investigate. I know, muttered Aoesu sadly. I'm glad I could make a blade like that before this all started. Tell everyone to pack up. We're going to visit Warod. I think it's time of a reunion of the four gods of Ishgar. Protector of the fairies. The origin of the hidden origin. Are we just going to sit here all day? Asked Mavis, pestering Ichigo as he sat in the small cafe of the town they had reached. Making sure no one was paying attention to him, Ichigo tilted his head towards Mavis and brought a hand up to shield his mouth's movements from any potential observers. We're getting information, muttered Ichigo, pulling slightly on the top of the hood of the cloak he was wearing to shield his hair from view. It was all it was really good for at this stage. He had grabbed it from some random traveler on his way towards the town, rushing off before the man could even turn and spot him. Damaging the cloak after that had gotten it to this stage, so, if the man decided the cloak really was worth coming back to the town for, he'd not recognize it in the state it was in. Isn't this dangerous? Fairy tale is kind of wanted. If you get seen dash. No one has seen me in 7 years, Mavis. You really think they'll recognize me? Well, your hair is a bit of a giveaway. And that's exactly why I'm hiding it, Ichigo muttered back in annoyance. Why don't you listen in on some of them anyway? You're basically a ghost in a lot of ways. They can't even see you. What exactly do you even want? The location of the Holy Palace? I could tell you if you wanted. Did others have the help of someone like you? No, they did not. I can do it myself, else there's no point to all of this. Despite denying her help, Mavis still smiled. Well, I suppose that's a good answer in itself. But you can't honestly expect to just sit around here all day? What are you going to find out? You're smart, Mavis. Tell me, did you ever go to a pub when you were the first and just listen in? A general pub, not one in the guild itself. Mavis shook her head. Not for very long periods of time. I never could be bothered. And some of the fun of going to pubs anyway was the alcohol, and I can't exactly get drunk in this state. I'm a floating construct of magic, for crying out loud. That's why you don't understand what I'm doing. Did you know, for instance, that the others have attacked the Magic Council? They what? Ichigo was really glad no one could hear Mavis's scream, but it did mean he had to force himself not to flinch from her outburst. Nothing looked more suspicious than talking and reacting to things that weren't there. This is why I told you to listen. Were you just messing around and daydreaming? Maybe, Mavis muttered, embarrassed. I can't help it. We're finally going on an adventure. I'm not stuck to the grounds of Tenro any longer. Well, I wasn't before, but I needed to be patient back then. But now, it's just pure freedom. Ichigo smiled into his hand. I'm glad you're so happy about this, despite some of the things happening elsewhere. I listened in when I was getting my drink dash. Which was just water. You think I have money for anything? I need a drink and at least water is free. It'd be more suspicious if I didn't buy anything. I suppose. Continue. Ichigo sighed in response to her demand. Well, while I was waiting, I heard the two men by the bar, the bald guy and the blonde-haired one, discussing how the Magic Council's Rune Knight headquarters was attacked by Fairy Tail. Apparently they are even kind of impressed that we were strong enough to launch such an attack, though it seems the others were beaten away. Ichigo paused for a second in thought. They probably got Taoshiro out at least, so I'll have to thank them for that later on. I can't really see any other reason to attack other than that anyway, especially with the delicate situation we are dash. We're fine. We're in. Now, it's probably extremely tense. Mavis crossed her legs in midair as she floated around the table. I see. We can only assume the Magic Council will order a full response. An action such as this can't go unpunished. They'd be seen as weak. They'd have to respond in full force. Anything less might be seen as a sign of weakness and would potentially encourage more attacks. I thought the same. You're good at calculations and estimates. When do you think the Rune Knights will reach this town in full force? Mavis rested her head against one of her hands. If news is already out, then, even if it travels fast, it still would need time to spread, and the size of this town does mean it could get caught off the grid a bit, so even longer for somewhere like here. Taking into account your training time, I'd assume it happened around about yesterday. any earlier and I doubt it would be as interesting news. Knowing that, continued Mavis, Rune Knights would have started searching maybe 12 hours after the whole event. They need some time to recover and plan out their response. After that, they would most likely try and put everyone on high alert. Possibly send at least a small squadron to each town as well, even if it is just for a brief while. To somewhere like here, taking into account distance, I'd say we have maybe another day till Rune Knights arrive. Latest. A day, huh? Ichigo took a sip of his drink before smirking. We'll be long gone by then anyway. And hopefully I'll be forgotten simply as a traveling mage. It's not unusual for them to want to avoid being identified at times. They could be earlier, however, muttered Mavis in warning, even going to spare a glance out of the window quickly too. They would stop you to try and identify you. They wouldn't want to risk missing a chance of finding Fairy Tail because they were careless. And, if you are found here, they'll become a threat to the town itself. They might come to think that this town is hiding you. Ichigo paused for a few moments before he started to stand. You're right. I doubt we'll get much more at this point, so let's continue going. I at least want to pop to the library at this town before we go. Sometimes these isolated areas actually have a few rare gems in the form of books. Did Levi tell you that? Yeah, Ichigo muttered quietly as he quickly left the establishment and heading further into the town. She used to drag me and Laxus all over Fiori sometimes in search of a book or two. Half the time it turns out it was in Magnolia the whole time, and she'd end up with about 20 other books, each rarer than the next. That's why there might be something about the Holy Palace here. It's a long shot, but it's one of the few available to me right now. Turning a corner, Ichigo swore before darting into a nearby alleyway and pushing himself back up behind a stack of crates. Mavis peered round the corner for him warily before holding up a hand. A small group of Rune Knights slowly passed a moment later, their heads occasionally turning to track each person before moving on. Only when the coast was clear did Mavis signal him, and even then he didn't dare go out the way he came. Instead he took a diversion through the rest of the back alleys, not trusting the main roads. I thought you said they'd get here later, Mavis. Hey, I did warn you. I didn't expect them to get here this early, however. We got to this town about an hour ago, but a town like this wouldn't be visited at this time. Perhaps they're following a different search plan. Or maybe it was you. You're going to blame me for this. Well. Yeah. I think that should have influenced their decision a bit. Your magic is still climbing, even now, as you regain the magic that had been sealed away from you. Any sensors in the area must have picked it up from miles away, and it would certainly be suspicious when a magical power appears that's at least 10 times larger than the amount of magical power even stored in the city in the first place. What I wouldn't give for one of Kisuk's cloaks. Muttered Ichigo, annoyed. The library's coming up. We'll have to be quick and hope they don't have any sensors able to pinpoint my position. It'll take them a while. The one thing going for you is all the magic has widened the area sensors think you occupy. With this much magic, I'd reckon the sensors believes you are somewhere in this quarter of the town. With time they might be able to shrink that, but their most effective method is to search all hiding spots in the area. You won't have long before they check the library. We'll need to search fast then, Ichigo said in response, spotting the small building with the sign for the library hanging partway over the main road ahead of them. Peering round the corner again, Ichigo ensured the coast was clear before he and Mavis rushed across, trying not to look more out of place than they already did. The door opened with the sound of a bell before he quickly shut it, but it didn't seem to cause any panic to those inside. They simply seemed to think he was a random visitor. Hello, greeted an old librarian as he approached the main desk, glancing around at the amount of shelves in the place. It was bigger than it looked. While only a single floor, he could see it went back a bit further, having about 10 double-sided shelf blocks in total. It wasn't as much as he would have liked, but it could have been worse. Is there anything you are looking for? Seeing nothing but pure honesty and a willingness to help in the old lady's eyes, Ichigo quietly spoke. I'm looking for some information. Do you have any books on old religions, old civilizations, old magic, and add just general old history to that too? The old lady frowned for a second as she tried to remember. I'm not sure we have much on the second and third ones. We have plenty on the others, but it depends what time period you are looking for. Do you know when the history you are after took place? 400 years ago, probably. 400 years, the old lady muttered. I'm sorry, but I don't think we have much. There's no books. She paused as a sudden thought shot to the front of her mind. Oh wait, I think we might have something. It's a religious text, but it might have what you are looking for. It'll do, said Ichigo, thanking the lady. He let her lead him over to a shelf hidden away in the back of the building before leaving him to it after he grabbed the book. Mavis took her usual place of resting on his shoulder as he skimmed the book. It's a dud, Mavis muttered to him after 5 minutes. Plenty of holy references, but nothing that could be a link to the Holy Palace. Should we alter the time period we're searching? We've already got a hard enough time as it is to find it. If Aoyasu could find it, and he's from back then as well, then it has to have been something from back then at the latest. Perhaps it was mentioned again recently, but then I'd probably have known about if that was the case. Excuse me, came a female voice from behind him, making Ichigo jump and reach into his cloak for the smaller blade hidden beneath it in a slowly constructing sheath. The larger blade on his back wouldn't be very helpful in such an enclosed area, so he'd have to settle for a single smaller one instead. He was about to draw the blade when he recognized the voice properly, the tension draining to be replaced with exasperation when he heard the woman's next words. I am sorry for the delay in reaching you, my prince. How did you find me, Nozomi? Ichigo asked as he released his grip on the small blade, already having an idea of the answer he was about to receive. I sensed you, Nozomi said in response, confirming Ichigo's suspicions. It took a bit longer than I wanted, but I was able to lock onto you once you stopped moving so much. Then I simply wandered around the town a bit and asked if anyone had seen anyone wearing a cloak of some kind and looking suspicious, since I assumed you would find something to hide your hair with in the first place. It would have been easier if you had one of Kisuk's cloaks, as I could have used that to try and identify you a bit more easily. You better not have lured the Rune Knights over here with those questions. I don't want more attention being drawn to myself. You don't need to worry, Nozomi said confidently. I believe I managed to pass us both off as a married couple. I figured it would work best with me searching for you and pretending to act concerned, and the suspicious aspect is simply you sneaking away from me to indulge in hobbies that I would disapprove of. The old lady back there seems to think you're a historian with a case of workaholic for making me worry. Ichigo sighed, glancing round the corner of the bookshelf just to make sure there really were no Rune Knights quickly approaching. There weren't, but he did see the librarian looking amused as she went about her work. It made him wonder exactly what Nozomi had said, but she did create a few awkward understandings if he remembered correctly before the whole Tenro incident, so, if she hadn't changed much, he could understand why the lady might have believed her. That and Nozomi said things so bluntly that you couldn't always tell if she was lying or not. Alright then, at least you didn't get them rushing towards us. You haven't answered what you are doing here yet though. Why are you here, Nozomi? Nozomi tilted her head in confusion. Isn't it obvious? I'm here to help. Look, nothing against you, but I don't need your help. It's why I left by myself. Oh, we know. Miss Dogen and I just decided to ignore that and send one of us anyway. Look, you can't just wait, one of you? Where is Miss Dogen then? Nozomi shrugged. With Kisuk. Probably. His job is to keep an eye on everyone else for you, and potentially throw Kisuk off the trail if necessary. We did figure you'd want to be alone to do whatever you were doing, but we couldn't help but worry and want to help. And we won't interfere in your choices either. And what if Kisuk demands Miss Dogen to give him my location? Then he misunderstands the side we are on, said Nozomi harshly. We don't serve him. We tagged along, but not because he gave us the option. We tagged along because we follow you. He can ask or demand all he wants. We won't obey any orders but your own. Ichigo wanted to scream in frustration. I didn't ask for you to obey me. Why the hell do you keep doing so? You waited 7 years for me, for crying out loud. Why didn't you two at least try to move on with your lives? Nozomi glared back at him seriously. It's our choice. Miss Dogen's entire identity revolves around your existence. You gave him the chance he had to start anew, and he believes he can't ever repay that debt, even if he serves you for the rest of his life. As for me, Nozomi glanced away in embarrassment. I'm not from this world. Why does poor Lyusica stay with Fairy Tail, despite claiming she hates humans? This world wasn't my own. I'm a stranger to it. Is it so wrong of me to want to stick close to the one constant I have from my old world? But I wasn't from Edela's Nozomi. I don't care, she said defiantly. You are the prince. You are the brother of the king, just like how Kajirozo was my brother. Just because you are from another world, it doesn't mean those bonds aren't there. And I remember you being in Edela's for long enough for it to matter. Without you, I truly am alone. Not even Miss Dogen can fill that void. Ichigo sighed before flicking her on the head to her annoyance. You're a fool, but you might as well tag along then. Fools don't take no for an answer anyway. Where are we going then? Asked Nozomi as she fell into line behind him, the two slipping away out the door before anyone could notice. The street was clear. Clearer than it should have been at a time like this considering how busy it had been beforehand. Something's wrong. I know, muttered Ichigo before he gestured at Mavis quietly. Go up. Check it out. Mavis nodded, rising quickly in the air until she could see over all the houses and into the majority of the alleyways. We've got trouble. She called back down urgently. I'm seeing rune knights blocking every major exit. There's only one left through a trail of back alleys, but it's too straightforward. It's probably a trap. I see, responded Ichigo before tapping Nozomi on the shoulder. Well then, looks like you're already going to become invaluable. Can you get us out of here? Please, said Nozomi proudly. There's nowhere I can't go. So long as there's no high-level barrier in the way, I assume. Yeah, Nozomi muttered, her pride deflating. But something like this, it's child play. Swiping one hand to the side and spinning her palm, a rip opened in the air beside them. Nozomi gestured for Ichigo to go first before following afterwards herself, the portal shutting behind her and causing many rune knight sensors nearby to swear in frustration, the magical power they had all been sensing vanishing abruptly. Protector of the fairies. Kisuk tried to ignore his instincts to leave as he waited. He had sensed the massive amount of magical power being released earlier and he knew the source could be none other than Ichigo's. Not only that, Nozomi and Miss Dogen had reappeared much earlier than he had anticipated when they had first dropped him off, claiming Ichigo had vanished. Nozomi was out looking for Ichigo and hopefully she would have good luck on that front, otherwise he'd have to start searching himself. He already wanted to, but he did say he'd help the people here and he felt obliged to follow through on that promise. That and he was kind of interesting in a few of them anyway, so the data he could collect would be worth a bit of annoyance. Patience was necessary for research after all. After a bit longer waiting, people finally started to approach the meeting table they had created. Really it was nothing more than a set of crates lined up neatly, but it worked for right now. Chairs were again in short supply, needing more boxes just to give everyone a place to sit. He was just glad he had managed to steal a chair before anyone else did. Slowly every member of the guild trailed in, some supported by others due to not wanting to miss the meeting. This was going to determine their future after all. Welcome then, said Kisuk with a smile, ignoring the glare he got from Makarov for immediately taking control of the flow of the meeting. For those who don't know me, I'm one of your old seniors of the guild and Guildarts' old teammate. Kisuk Urahara, at your service. That caused a stir amongst them all. They all knew his name and the general premise of what he had done. And he doubted any of them knew how far he went, considering only Makarov had an open glare against him. Good then, now don't worry about introducing yourselves, I know who you lot are already. I even met some of you a while ago anyway, though I suppose Nirvana must have kept you occupied at the time. You're the cloaked man, said Urza, Kisuk confirming it with a nod of his head. I thought so. The others mentioned you. I'm glad people remember me. Now then, on to today's business. You all know what's happened to Fairy Tail over the years. They've been beaten down, made into a dark guild. You really don't get the best of luck sometimes, do you? But fate has decided to change all of that. And the source of that fate is the Grand Magic Games. Grand Magic Games. Natsu smirked at the sound of it. Sounds fun. Isn't there a problem with that, however? Asked Gray, crossing his arms over his bandaged chest. Think about it. We're a dark guild. Whatever this Grand Magic Games thing is, it sounds far too official to let a dark guild compete. Ah, well, I can see why you would think that. Doran Bolt, would you care to explain to all these lot what the Grand Magic Games is? Doran Bolt nodded as he rose slightly from his seat. The Grand Magic Games is a tournament designed by the King of Fiori, Toma e Fiori. He initiated this competition 7 years ago during your absence, and it's only grown in popularity over the years. The general premise is a 5-day showdown of both surprise competitions and battle portions, all of which are unknown till the day. The winner receives praise and status from the tournament as the whole thing is open to the public to watch, and the influence you can generate towards your guild through a good showing is tremendous. I don't see how that helps us, said Laxus gruffly, warily watching Kisuk. How does something like this help? Because they opened it up to guilds this year, said Makarov as he cut in. Not legal guilds, not dark guilds, simply guilds. We debated this for a few hours now to be sure, added Byakuya seriously. Something like this is not an easy matter to consider. We couldn't just accept it at face value. And, because of this all, we came to the conclusion you just heard. Now that we're all on the same page, shall we get into the details? Kisuk pulled out a large map from under the table before having it sprawl across the table of crates. Straighten it out, won't you? Not there, a bit more to the perfect. With the map in place, Kisuk lifted up his cane and used it to point at places far out of his reach. Now here is Crocus. The Magic Council has their headquarters right over here not too far south. And then we have the headquarters of the Rune Knights a bit west of that. These three form a bit of a trinity between themselves with this kind of defensive layout. It's a good thing you didn't get caught too near Crocus, else the consequences might have been severe. Pointing far across the map, Kisuk let his cane fall on another dot. Now we are here. A decent distance away, but it won't take long for every town and the surrounding areas to be checked. We need to move and split up if we want to survive before regrouping in 3 months from now when the Grand Magic Games begin. 3 months. Urza frowned. That's a long time to be separated considering the enemies that are hunting us. You've got it the wrong way round. It's a blessing. Maybe some people will get captured during that time, maybe they won't, but at least if they do, then not everyone will be. It'll also force them to divide up even more if they do learn that we have split up. There's another reason for this, added Gildarts. Training. I'm sure those who took part in yesterday's prison break understand why this is necessary. Without training, we'll never be able to keep up with everyone else. It won't be enough. Heads shot to Lucy, who suddenly realized she had spoken out loud and started to turn red from embarrassment. I mean dash. No, said Kisuk, cutting her off. You're right. It won't be enough. Kisuk turned towards Makarov and everyone noticed how conflicted the master seemed before he finally nodded his head. That is why we, after very long consideration, have decided to take a shortcut. The puzzled looks on their faces was completely expected, Kisuk already having his next explanation on the tip of his tongue. He was beaten to it by Mistogan, however, standing by the doorway out of the way. He's referring to the method of unlocking a mage's second magical core. It's called Second Origin. You were listening in, Mistogan. Kisuk shook his head. Go ahead, tell them. Not like I care. Mistogan nodded reluctantly, regretting interrupting now that he was being forced to explain it all. This second container within our bodies, it's not used at all generally. In fact, it was only recently able to be unlocked. Before then its existence was purely theoretical. The Bureau of Magical Development was the one who actually discovered this. When? Mistogan paused, caught off guard by Kisuk's sudden interruption. Huh? I said when? When did they discover it? I'm not sure. Was it before 30 years ago? No. Over 20 though. Kisuk smiled smugly. Doesn't matter then. I beat them to it by far, it seems. Mistogan frowned. Then why not go public with it? Surely such a discovery would be praised? You made many other discoveries public after all, so why keep this one a secret? Because I discovered it by accident. And I realized the importance of keeping it a secret. The second origin, as you put it, doesn't just hold the capabilities to store more magic than before. It's more than that. The second origin is a second core. It's a second opportunity. With it, possibilities of combinations open up like never before. Possibilities like Dash, Shinigami and Hollows. Kisuke paused as he turned to Shinji, seeing the man's cold eyes on him. You're the one who discovered it after all. You're the one who made it possible. It was because of this second origin. Yes, admitted Kisuke. It was thanks to that discovery that people like you came to be. But I can't take all the credit for its original discovery, however. You see, I believe it was around even earlier. Why, the proof is sitting with us right now, isn't that right, Natsu? Dragged Neil. What? Natsu glanced around as everyone's eyes turned to him. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? What about your heavenly flame dragon mode? It's a power that combines that of a fire dragon and that of a sky dragon. The ingestion of the other dragon slayer magic along with a good dose of powerful will caused you to incorporate it into that empty core, and hence allowed you to unlock this power. However, it drains you heavily each time you use it. Why? Because you are using one core. You are drawing the power of a fire dragon, but the power of a sky dragon is heavily locked away. You exhaust so much energy just pulling a sliver of power to the surface. But I can solve all of that. Kisuke threw out his arms as he faced them all. You see, this procedure has been undertaken by many mages as well in Fiori, I guarantee it, and of course Doranbold has records to prove this too. Juranikis, Hibikilates, Bacchus Grow, all names you recognize, I assume. I can do the same for all of you, and for once I'll do it all for free. I'll give you the power to stand on even footing with those who sped past you in these 7 years. I know this is a lot to take in, Makarov added as he noticed their restless faces. Think about it and let us know your choices. The Grand Magic Games will be coming up in 3 months and I'll be considering which of you to enter to win. If we win, the prize is a single wish. Anything we want. Even the option to reverse our status and turn us back into a legal guild. That last single sentence broke almost everyone out of any hesitation they had. It was something they all wanted, and none of them wanted to miss it. Kisuke took the opportunity to sit back down as the meeting started coming to a close. Where the mages scattered to train was none of his concern. Doranbold and Makarov would handle those details, and he'd sort out the second origin before they left in order to allow them time to train with it. He noticed quickly that, despite everyone leaving, 2 presences had approached him. He glanced towards Toshiro and Shinji before faking a smile. Well, if it isn't Ichigo's friends. What can I do for you two? You can't perform the procedure on us, can you? Kisuke didn't bother pretending to smile anymore, recognizing that what he was being asked wasn't meant to be a question. No, I can't. And I see you both understand it as well. You don't have the problem that I described for Natsu. You pull out your hollow powers, or in Toshiro's case I assume his Dragon Slayer powers if he has been training properly, with perfect ease. Our situations are different though, pointed out Toshiro. Shinji has to wear a mask to trigger the chance while I can just call forth the magic. That's true. While you get a natural boost anyway with second origin, there are 2 forms it takes when dealing with its power. Shinji keeps his power sealed away, and calls if forth when needed. Natsu would be a type like this too, calling forth the extra magic when needed to enter that dual element mode. You however are an always active type, the power flowing as one and mixing. Ichigo's actually like that too, regardless of what it might have appeared as in the past. So nothing will change for us. Not completely, no. A 12-year-old, capable of dealing with mages far older and experienced than himself through his raw power. A man with the ability to defeat almost anything when he puts his hollow mask on. I lost to Blue Note, you realize. A man with a perfect way to count your ability along with a large amount of strength in the first place. But you still kept fighting for a while, I'm betting. The 2 of you have had that growth already, just like Ichigo had it when he was a baby. Kisuke paused as he glanced at Toshiro. I doubt you really need it. You're strong, I can sense that. Kisuke quickly turned his gaze to Shinji. You are a different matter. I may be able to do something. You can. Yes. You remember the man who gave you your power? Mayuri was simply imitating my work. I can perfect your hollowification however if you wish. Perfect it? You are referring to the resonance rate, right? Kisuk nodded. I see you are familiar with it. Good, that saves time explaining as much. What rate are you at? I trust you remember it. 76. That low. Kisuk sighed. Well, it was Mayuri doing it. Well, what's Ichigo's then? 100. Kisuk frowned at Shinji's shock. You act like it's unnatural. It's meant to be that high. Any combination should beat in pure harmony with one another. Kisuk gave another shake of his head before he locked eyes with Shinji, looking as serious as Shinji had ever seen the man. I can put you at the same level, but there are dangers. There is a reason your power is an activate type and not a full-time usage. You won't have the buffer Ichigo has because you lack the third piece. There is a chance that this procedure to increase you to the correct resonance level might cause you to become a hollow yourself. You will have to fight for control just like you did originally. Shinji gulped nervously before steadying his resolve. Whatever it takes, right? I'll do it. Just, is it worth it? Will it make me stronger? Yes. You'll be able to access hollow powers you never were able to reach before. Your power when you put on that mask will far surpass your current state. But you'll have to survive first. I'll ask this again, and only because you are Ichigo's friend. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I already said I'd do it. I can't afford to take things slow with everything that's going on. I'll survive, I guarantee it. Kisuk smirked. Well, I can't say you don't have bravery. I'll set everything up after I've done the second origin procedures. Then we'll head to somewhere isolated in case you go out of control for a while. It wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. I hope you're ready then. It'll be nothing like your previous experience. The hollow inside you will have had plenty of time to learn. Win or die, that's the rule when it comes to hollows. Survival of the fittest. It was only then did Kisuk notice Shinji and Toshiro had stopped paying attention to him. He turned round only to see a hovering green portal in the air, Ichigo, and Nozomi grabbing a handful of cloaks from an open crate without pausing. Nozomi's head suddenly looked up, the lack of noise catching her attention before she noticed them all. Tugging urgently on Ichigo's sleeve, she caused him to glance up at them before he froze as well. As if on sync, both slowly raised a hand up before waving awkwardly. Ah. See ya. The portal snapped shut even as Kisuk leaped forward, closing before his hand could even brush against the surface. He sighed as he looked down at what the two had been stealing before his eyes widened and he turned to Miss Dogen. These are my cloaks. It took a while but we managed to replicate them. I see. Kisuk frowned. What the hell does he need that many for? Protector of the fairies. All right, how do I look? Nozomi frowned as she looked Ichigo over, letting her senses try and search for his presence. It works. Thank God, Ichigo muttered. After stealing all those cloaks from the base, he had held off wearing them until now, right before they started their plan. It was extremely bulky and really would constrict his movements in a fight, but he'd abandon them if it came to that. The one advantage all these cloaks was giving him, however, was it had finally managed to hide his magical power. I should warn you, this is only a temporary solution. Nozomi glanced at the cloaks critically before shaking her head. It looks like you'll have an hour at most before they all break. They aren't mean to hide a magical power as large as yours. We're lucky this even works. An hour, huh? Ichigo shook his head, ridding himself of the worries he had. It'll be enough. It'll have to be. All right. Nozomi tightened the cloak around herself nervously. This is risky, you know that, right? I know, but if the information isn't here, then where else could it be? Nozomi nodded reluctantly. All right. We should be able to get away with one use of my magic. I'll get us within the complex as close as I can. Nozomi grabbed his hand before the entire world felt like it was spinning. The surroundings suddenly shifted and they found themselves within a large library. What the hell was that? Whispered Ichigo. That wasn't your usual magic. It's a quicker version. Takes a long time to set up the destination, however. So that's what you were doing? Nozomi nodded. Yes. My portals would be detected instantly. The security on this building is one of the highest in all of Fiori. She gave a glance around the library before dragging him forward. This way. We need to get to the lower levels. You're right, responded Ichigo quickly. Have you ever been to the lower levels of this place before? Nozomi shook her head. This is the headquarters of the Magic Council itself, with so many detection methods employed that it would be suicide to even try. You did though, I assume. Well yeah, but I hit a barrier. I got chucked off course and appeared over a pit of lava, barely managing to escape with a second portal. A second late and I would have been dead. Well, you're in for a treat, said Ichigo as they approached a large door, the only barrier between them and the stairs behind it. Ichigo reached out to it before a large magic seal appeared before him. He didn't back down, however, letting it scan his magic through its database and check his authorization. This was the hard part. Their entire plan depended whether or not he had been removed from the Rooster of Wizard Saints. Even if he had died in their records, there was still a chance they would have left him in like they did with many other dead Wizard Saints. A sign of respect that inadvertently opened up a security nightmare if the Wizard Saint wasn't actually dead. And hopefully they hadn't updated it now if they hadn't before because of the actions of everyone else. Identification confirmed. Yes. It worked. Welcome Ichigo and Nozomi didn't bother listening as they rushed through the doorway as it opened, hurrying down the stairs. The upper level of the library was essentially the showcase for the whole world. Those with the correct authority were allowed down to the lower levels, however. This applied to Wizard Saints, generals, mages on the Magic Council, and of course the chairman himself. This library also held the collective knowledge of all of Fiori when it came to magic. If the information on the Holy Palace wasn't here, then who knew where it could be? They didn't waste any time when they reached the first bookshelves, grabbing any book that looked reliable and useful and carrying it to one of the man tables in the room. It was almost midnight, so they doubted anyone would be there at this time. It was why they had chosen now to act rather than earlier. As they split off, Ichigo shot further and further into the back of the library. The information was organized on some fashion and he knew some of the oldest books would be near the back, hopefully containing information on the past 400 years. He found plenty of them when he got there, grabbing as many as he could and rushing back. They could read later if necessary so long as they had the books that allowed them to do as such. It took 50 minutes till they had finally managed to search almost everywhere, the library's scale simply so massive. 10 minutes left. Ichigo knew they'd have to finish up soon and leave. He was about to hurry back to Nozomi when he stopped, seeing a door to one side. He had seen it before, Juashiro once showing him this place when he was younger, though he hadn't been allowed to touch anything, and he had said that the room he was now looking at was off limits to all but the chairman. It was risky, he knew that, but there was a chance the information they needed was in there too. He reached out towards the door handle before a sudden magic seal appeared in front of him. Ichigo pulled back his hand as he swore, but it was too late. It had gotten a glimpse of his magic. He prepared himself for the alarms that were about to ring when instead the door clicked open. Identification confirmed. Welcome back, Juashiro Yukatake. Ichigo froze. Juashiro? What the hell was going on? There was no way his magic signature could have been mistake for Juashiro. It was too different. He crushed his doubts before pushing onwards. The room he entered was small and simple. A basic writing desk was positioned in the middle of the room while a pair of bookshelves rested on either side of the room. The room, however, was covered in dust. It was like no one hadn't been in there for years. Approaching the desk slowly, a small sealed envelope caught his eye, resting on top of the table. It had his name on. There wasn't much time left, he knew that, but he couldn't wait. He quickly opened the letter before scanning the contents within it. There was one word that stood out more than anything else. Kami cake. He couldn't explain it, but the word gave him a strange sense of forbidding. He didn't understand half of what Juashiro was saying. Ichigo muttered, reading part of the letter out loud. If you're reading this, then it means the conditions have been met, just as predicted. It also means that the kami cake is on the way to being successful. I regret I couldn't be here to tell you any more, but I fear I will not have much more time. I have very little time till I am to resign as the chairman of the Magic Council, and I still need to meet you and ensure you will have access to this place in the future. Ichigo frowned. Was that why Juoshiro had been so insisted at him becoming a wizard saint? He remembered the man doing something back then as well, but he hadn't known what. It had just been suspicious. Had Juoshiro taken a sample of his magical power and replaced it with the one stored for himself? But why? For what purpose? I'm not sure when you'll be reading this. Part of the conditions for the kami cake to be successful mention something known as the Holy Palace. I won't pretend to even understand what this means, but I understand that the condition must be cleared in order to ensure success. Every book in this room is the knowledge that might contain the clue necessary. I wish I could be more help, but I'm afraid I truly am unaware of what this Holy Palace is. It's like a dark haze in my mind whenever I try to look further into the meaning, refusing to part with any clues or interpretations to the riddle. And I also fear I may be unable to help you when you eventually read this. Unable to help? Why did that make him so afraid? The way Juoshiro seemed to write it, the sorrow he could almost feel in the man's words, had Juoshiro already been aware that he was going to die soon when he wrote this? The Holy Palace, however. He looked around at all the books. There was a lot. Juoshiro always came through, it seemed. I wish you all the best, Ichigo. Maybe we'll meet again if the kami cake truly managed to succeed. If it didn't, however, I'm afraid this may be the last time we interact. I've never seen so many conditions towards a single goal in all my lifetime. Anything can go wrong when dealing with fate. It can be such a fickle thing, but in the end I must trod down this dark path if I am to do some good for this world. Juoshiro Yukatake. Ichigo's fists tightened around the letter as it crumbled before he shoved it into his trousers and grabbed all the books he could. There was too many. This wouldn't work, not with the time left. Instead he piled them all on the floor before rushing out of the room and shouting out, "Nozomi!" Nozomi's head snapped towards the source of the voice and started rushing, moving even faster when she suddenly felt a massive burst of magic explode into her senses. It seemed the cloaks had given out. Everyone would have sensed that, and they had to go now before the chairman decided to lock down the whole building. She was about to tell Ichigo this when he grabbed her and dragged her into the room. I know already, we've got to go. The books. We can't leave them behind. They won't be the ones, Ichigo muttered confidently. If there are any books in here with the information we seek, it's these ones. Juoshiro's smart, he'll have found something in these for us. I see, Nozomi responded, recognizing the name as the previous chairman from the history she had read of Earthland. All right. Let's go then. With a sudden portal below them, both Ichigo and Nozomi fell out of the library, the books falling with them. A moment later and they were back where they originally started, hundreds of miles away from the Magic Council. Ichigo stripped off all the excess broken cloaks before grabbing a book and opening it. Might as well make a start, he muttered. There'll be something here. There has to be. Protector of the Fairies. The Holy Palace. It's not in here, called out Ichigo as he added the book to their ever-growing pile of useless information. Are you sure? Asked Nozomi, taking the book to have a look at the cover. The Old Ways, A Path to Enlightenment. It could be connected from the religion angle. It's not related to religion. Nozomi looked at him warily. Are you sure? There's still a few more one side for now. In case I'm wrong, but I'm starting to think looking at simple texts for it won't help. If religion played a role, it was part of the culture, I think stuff like that might show up better in other places. Nozomi shrugged before closing her current book and putting it to one side. How about general history then? She asked as she reached for another book. There's promise perhaps in those. Perhaps. Ichigo scratched his head as he glanced at the scattered piles of books all around them. Their problem is we should have found something, but now. Some correlation maybe? Something to link it together or something that appears somewhat consistent. Perhaps it's the writer's interpretation of the events that keeps it all different. If that was the case, then we would have at least picked up on it once. From how both my brother and how Hades described this place, and the hints from Aoesu, we can infer that there is something special to that place. Something even a normal man like Hades can pick up on, and something that is seen only by people like my brother and Aoesu. Ichigo shook his head briefly as he put his book back down. I know I've asked you this before, but did he ever mention anything to you? You knew my brother longer than I did. The Holy Palace was not something he ever explained, responded Nozomi, a trace of sadness creeping into her voice. Perhaps he never trusted us to share such information with us. Or perhaps he simply didn't believe we were smart enough to even try and understand. Now don't think that. All of you were definitely important to him. If he really didn't say anything though, there has to be a reason. Ichigo sighed again in annoyance. It's hard to work out the exact time period of when he was in Earthland 4. When did he go back? Before I ended my training with Kisuke? Afterward? It has to be during a time where he wouldn't be noticed, else I'm sure Juashiro would have picked up on him, and it has to be during a time before I met Juashiro. Maybe even before I even joined Fairy Tail, or at least before I started getting known about. So you think he was moving about before you were active in the world? It's the only explanation I can think of for why he wasn't discovered, and why Edelas wasn't discovered as well. If it had been, do you think the Magic Council would have ever let it become a problem? Nozomi shook her head. No. For all our strength, I doubt we could have fought against them if they decided to try and invade our world through the anima. Their level of technology far outstripped our own in many areas, even if we have some supremacy in certain technologies, and they weren't limited by a finite resource as we were. Exactly. So when was he around? Or to ask the right question, where was he? He was undoubtedly skilled with magic, probably even as a child once he noticed his gift, and yet again we never heard about it. So where was he? Where could he be that no one would find him? Or where would he be that no one could tell anyone they found him? Nozomi shook her head. There's nowhere that could have happened. Nozomi froze before quickly grabbing one of the books and skimming through it, this one lacking any official title and being more like a record book for Juashiro himself. Did you work it out? Asked Mavis, patiently waiting one side as she tried to entertain herself. Her current attempt involved trying to replicate what someone who could grab things normally could do when climbing a tree. She might have. Nozomi? Did you work it out? Maybe, said Nozomi as she skimmed towards the correct page. She suddenly stopped before she skimmed the contents just to be sure. Here. Ichigo wasted no time rushing towards her and looking over her shoulder, his arms crossed as he examined the words with a scrutinizing eye. This is just notes about a mission request, muttered Ichigo in annoyance. How can this help us? Read it carefully. I am. Failures now stand at 107. Possible need for additional warnings to ensure fewer mages lose their lives. Lives? People died on this quest. Yes, muttered Nozomi sadly. This record is one of the many about the 100-year quest. As of this year, I know that only one man has ever returned from it. Gildarts Clive. Still only him after 7 years. I've heard fewer people even want to try, and that is taking into account how low that number was even back then. Who would go on a quest where everyone already knows it is practically impossible to return from? And yet, it's still in Fiori, that area. There are still cities on maps that have never been erased. Why? But more importantly, does anyone really knows what goes on in there anymore? Ichigo frowned before that confusion slowly started to disappear as he realized what Nozomi was getting at. So you're saying the Holy Palace dash? I don't know, Nozomi said, cutting him off. You have to understand, my prince, it's only a guess. I could be entirely wrong. But you might not be, muttered Ichigo. Juashiro seemed to have suspicions enough if he left those notes for us. It's a lead, and one I doubt will be beaten by any other. Ichigo frowned again. But crossing that land is dangerous. We'd be going in blind. Ichigo took a few steps back before he started pacing back and forth, trying to think carefully. What if we? No, that won't do. That's idiotic. Perhaps. No. That would never work. Ichigo's head snapped towards Nozomi as he finally stopped pacing. I've got it. My prince. That place doesn't have any records in over 100 years. No one knows what has happened there. No one knows anything. No one, except the man who walked into there and came back out still alive. Nozomi nodded as she swiped a hand, all the books falling into a portal that she used to store possessions and other important objects. So we're returning to Fairy Tale again. Yes. Lock onto Gildarts's magical signature if you can. If we are in luck he might have wandered away. If he hasn't, get him to take a walk away from everyone else. If I step through straight away, everyone will know it. If he steps through, everyone will panic since his magic would have appeared to vanish. We need to do this carefully if we don't want to cause a panic or if we want us to be able to leave easily afterwards. Finally, muttered Mavis as she abandoned her task, floating down to Ichigo's side as she rested on his shoulder. Let's go then. I've been tired of waiting and watching. It's boring. And you wouldn't even let me give you any clues. Mavis, you're bored enough that I'm sure at this point you'd just outright tell me if I asked for any bit of help just to get us there. Not my fault you're slow, she muttered under her breath. Ichigo still heard her however. You do realize that we are searching off basic information and guesswork. This was always going to be a little bit slower than you may have wanted. I know. You better make this up to me later. Yes, yes, said Ichigo, patting her on the head like she was a little kid. He turned back to Nozomi before gesturing beside them. After you then, if you're ready. Of course my prince. Nozomi closed her eyes for a few minutes, searching for the magic she recognized it belonging to Gildarts. Finally though she managed to lock onto him and she opened a portal with a wave of her hand. I'll check on him now. Leave everything to me. Protector of the fairies. Of all the people Gray expected to find outside the master's temporary room, Natsu wasn't one of them. Natsu. Natsu looked up from the ground in his clenched hands. Ah, Gray. You done with that procedure thing? It's second origin remember. And yeah, I just had it finished. Cool. So I suppose you'll be heading out soon enough then. I am. Gray crossed his arms as he looked between the master's door and Natsu. What are you doing here anyway? Trying to get suggestions on where to go? The master did say today that he was letting us have free rein on locations. He doesn't want any of us to be able to be compromised if he was captured or if anyone else involved in planning was. Oh no, I've got a few ideas. Natsu pressed his hands together. I'm actually heading out with a few others. Gajiel's coming, and I think Laxus is too to keep an eye on us. It's more to do with us also being dragon slayers I think though. We all want to get stronger, and I think he wants to try and see if he can master his magic more as well beyond where he is now. That's a surprise. I assumed Laxus would have stuck with Levi since they are friends. I know Wendy said something about already going with Levi when I offered. As for others as well, I think Lucy wanted to go on her own to see her father. She said she wanted to see if he was okay. Alone. I don't know. Urza might tag along but she did express interest in going with Myra too. Doubt that will happen though as she is likely to want to be with Lysina and Elfman. What about you? Shinji, Gray found himself saying almost instantly. He's been teaching me something and I want to try and make sure I have all the basics down. And it helps Toshiro is coming too so I can test my skills against another ice mage. Gray frowned as he thought about the two. Shinji said I'd have to go on ahead however with Toshiro. Something about needing to do something beforehand and that he'd catch up later. It could be worse. You hear anything about everyone else? From Tenro I mean. I assume most of the others have plans in place already. Kana and Laxus's followers are probably just going to team up. Unless they tag along with others of course. Natsu shook his head sadly. I can't blame them. Natsu. It was strange to Gray to hear such a sad tone from Natsu's voice. I don't like this, muttered Natsu. I don't like this one bit. Everyone's been suffering for years when we've been gone, and then we get back and the whole situation is made worse by our mistakes. By my mistakes. You're referring to the fire you made in the attack aren't you? Gray didn't need Natsu to answer. his flinch was enough. "You're scared, aren't you?" "Of course not. I'm not afraid of some fire." "Then prove it," said Gray, grabbing Natsu and pulling him out of his seat. Natsu instantly went to respond as he normally would, sending a flaming fist at Gray before he stopped, the flames vanishing. "I'm afraid all right," Natsu muttered. "When I got angry back then, when I thought you were killed, I snapped. It was hard to pull that power out, but the moment I did so it felt so overwhelming. It was like I was a god, there was that much power running through my veins. I felt unstoppable, I felt untouchable. And yet you couldn't control that power." "Look at what I did to Tenro," muttered Natsu. "Look what I did to that headquarters we attacked. I can't control those flames. There's so much power in them, so much that I can simply overwhelm an enemy, and yet what is the point if I can't even reel them back in afterwards? What is the point of spending all those years trying to control my flames as they can't even listen anymore? So you'll give up? You'll give up and that's it? You'll run away like a coward? What do you suggest I do then? What would you do?" Gray froze. He wanted to say he wouldn't worry about his fears, that he'd overcome them and learn to do what he believed he couldn't. But he couldn't say something he didn't believe. Not with the pain he felt. Not with the weakness he couldn't control, and the one that kept growing with each day. How could he help when he couldn't even act on his own advice? "I don't know," Gray finally said. "I honestly don't know. I'm sorry, Natsu, but that might be an answer you'll have to find on your own. That fear. This may be wrong of me to say because of my own circumstances, but I'll tell you this. Sometimes it's better to have that fear. You know the dangers of those flames. They can't be controlled. But maybe that's meant to be like that." Natsu looked at Gray in concern. "Gray? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," lied Gray, not wanting to let slip any of the thoughts he had in his mind. "Do you think the master's done in there? I assume you are waiting to speak." "Oh right," said Natsu as he rushed to his feet. He was about to knock on the door when he paused, turning back to Gray. "Thanks. And Gray, if you need anything, any help at all, you can rely on me, you know. We're friends." "I know, Natsu." He waited until Natsu knocked on the door and was calling in by the master, Gildarts passing them in what appeared to be a hurry as he left. Only when it was all quiet again did Gray bring a hand up to the side of his head and gripped tightly, his eyes clenching shut in pain. "I don't think you'll be able to help me with this though," he found himself muttering as once more a cruel and sadistic thought entered his mind. "I don't know if anything can help me. Protector of the fairies. Are you sure about this, Gildarts? We could really use your help with the situation at hand." Gildarts shook his head. "I'm sorry, Master, but I can't. The world has changed in these past 7 years, and I'm kind of afraid of what might have happened. I'll be back, I promise you that, but I need to check things out with my own eyes. I can't do that if I don't go now." "I see." Makarov didn't bother trying to hide how upset he was, but he didn't seem to appear overly angry either. "Well, I can't be telling you what to do forever. You will return though, right? You promise me you won't get captured or killed?" "Master, who do you think I am? I'm our guild's ace. I won't die." Makarov sighed. "Very well then. I won't pretend like I agree with your decision, but I'll accept it. I owe you that much. How long do you think you'll be?" "A year at most. I'll try and send word once you win the Grand Magic Games." "You better. You'll have no excuse to not then." Makarov paused. "What about Kana?" Gildarts's shoulders dropped in depression. I know I promised her that I wouldn't let her be alone anymore. But she won't be. She'll be with her friends. So long as she knows I will always love her, so long as she knows I'll be back to see her, I think she'll understand. I'd take her with me, but I don't want to risk it. I'm afraid she'll die on the journey and I won't be able to live with myself if I let that happen under my watch. She can hate me for leaving if she wants, but at least she'll live." "I'll take the blame," Makarov offered, surprising Gildarts. "I'll say you had a secret mission. I'll redirect her hatred towards me if needed." "Master." Gildarts could describe how touched he was at what the master was offered. Unfortunately he knew his conscience would never accept it, no matter what the outcome would be. No, you don't need to. I appreciate what you are offering, but I can't put you through that for my sake, especially considering this is my own selfish decision. I'll face the consequences when I return, and I'll be damned if I run away from it. All right then, said Makarov reluctantly. I wish you all the best, my child. These are not good days for us all, so make sure you come back to use. Preferably without losing any more limbs if you can help it. Gildarts couldn't help but laugh. I'll do my best. Clenching his fist, he let out a large smile. I can feel the power flowing through my veins. I see now why so many mages had the second origin procedure. I wouldn't even be surprised if those Rune Knight generals had it as well. Byakuya seemed to imply that after all. You think you'll be able to match them if it comes to it? Gildarts smirked. Oh, most definitely. This time at least I'd ensure that I'll force my opponent to actually release a good chunk of their power, maybe even all of it. The sound of knocking on the door brought Gildarts back to his senses before he started to get out of his chair. As he rose, Gildarts held out a hand, one Makarov took and gripped strongly. Seems like someone else wants you. I'll be off then. Goodbye for now, master. Be safe, Gildarts. Be safe. Letting go, Gildarts marched towards the door, opening it to reveal Natsu. He gave the boy a nod before passing him and Gray, sparing a look back before he started to rush off. He wanted to get out of the base before the news hit. Makarov might let it slip to Natsu, and he didn't want to have to face Kana to tell her he was leaving again. She'd understand, he hoped. Reaching the cave exit, he swore he could see Kisuk peering out of his operation room for a moment, a hand held up in farewell. Kisuk wasn't there a moment later, so he could have imagined it, but he liked to think Kisuk was just too shy to say farewell in person, instead doing it from afar. Or perhaps it was to give him some privacy. Either way, he appreciated the gesture. Pulling his small rucksack further up over his shoulder, Gildarts started walking. He already had everything he needed. A bit of money, more of which might be able to be obtained through odd tasks, some food, all of which should last him a little while, and finally his standard clothes he had come to love for traveling. The further he got from their temporary base, the more excited he started to feel. He couldn't help it. There was just something about traveling on the open road that he loved, even if his destination was unknown to him. He'd still manage to get by, just as he always did. It was only as it got to midday did he realize something was off, and had been for a few minutes now. It was like a light tap on his magic, as if something was trying to lock onto him. Normally he would have been suspicious, but the magic had a faint sense of familiarity to him, and not in that it could have belonged to an enemy. It took a few moments, but he remembered where he had sensed it before. It was the magic that green-haired girl used that had gone off with Ichigo. Nozomi, he believed she was called, if he was remembering correctly. Unsure of what she wanted but confident she wasn't a threat, Gildarts settled down on the ground, patiently waiting for her to finally show up. He was rewarded a minute later by a portal opening, Nozomi sticking a head through to see if it was safe. She glanced around at the surroundings in surprise before she looked at Gildarts. Are you alone? Yeah. Why? Hold on. Nozomi pulled her head back through the portal, but it didn't close. Gildarts didn't have to wait long when Nozomi returned a few moments later, Ichigo right behind her. The instant Ichigo stepped through the portal, it was like his senses had suddenly been overloaded. He could sense the sheer intensity of magic Ichigo was emitting, uncontrollably, even just like before, but on a much larger scale. We don't have long, said Ichigo quickly as he sat down next to Gildarts, the man quickly clearing his mind to stop focusing on the overwhelming magic in front of him. It won't take long for Kisuk to sense me and pinpoint my position. What happened? Your magic. It wasn't this high before. It's... Gildarts still couldn't believe his eyes. It's higher than my own, even with second origin. Second origin? What the hell is that? Ichigo quickly shook his head. No, it doesn't really matter that much. There's more important matters to get to before I need to leave. Leave. Gildarts quickly remembered Ichigo's previous words. You're trying to avoid Kisuk? What did he do? A whole list of things, but they aren't the reason I'm avoiding him. I can't trust myself to act on my own will right now so long as he's nearby. I need to do stuff and I'm not sure he'll understand. That actually brings us to why we're here. Ichigo raised a finger before pointing at Gildarts. The 100-year quest. I need you to tell me everything you saw there that could link to something called the Holy Palace. It might have been described as magnificent or other similar words, so think back carefully. I need to know where it is. Gildarts frowned before crossing his arms as he inspected Ichigo critically. There wasn't any sign of hesitation or doubt in his eyes. He was serious about this. More serious than he had ever seen the man. And with the magic he now had, he might be strong enough to survival in those lands. All right, I'll tell you. It's been a while but I do remember quite a few details very clearly. Do you have a map? Ah, yeah. Nozomi. The girl quickly summoned forth a map from her pocket dimension before unraveling it in front of them. Gildarts looked at it critically before he traced out the area the 100-year quest took place in. I see why you came to me. That's a lot of area to search. Eyeing the area carefully, Gildarts moved his finger towards the very center of the area. Here. That's where I think it was. You think? I honestly can't remember as well as I should do, but I did notice two important details. 1. The enemies I faced were strongest as I approached this certain town, and weaker as I got further away. I believe it's the central point of difficulty, and that's why it's so tough there. Alright. What's the second detail? The town itself. Be wary. It's locked in a time loop, forcing everyone to relive the same day over and over again. You can't save them, no matter how hard you may want to. I spent 10 weeks looking for the source and I never found it. I don't want to doubt you, but you said yourself you had things to do. You can't get slowed down there. Near the city itself is a large mountain. I saw something up there. I only got a glimpse, but it was incredible to see for that single moment. I did want to check it out, I won't deny that, but the monsters between me and it were too strong. That point is the pinnacle of it all, I can feel it. Ichigo nodded, already sensing Kisuke's presence starting to move. Alright, thanks for the help. Nozomi, we need to leave quickly. Of course my prince. You two be careful, called out Gildarts right before they re-entered the portal. That place is no picnic. If you let your guard down, you'll die. Don't worry, Ichigo responded with a reassuring smile. We'll be back. May be a while but we'll be back. You should be careful too. I heard about what you all did. Don't do anything stupid, Gildarts. I'm not taking that title of ace from you because you died. Then let us both promise to return to the guild them. Neither of us likes breaking our word after all. Good luck, Ichigo. If I needed it, you'll probably need it too. Protector of the Fairies. Makarov pressed his hands together in thought, processing what Natsu had just told him. Are you sure about this, Natsu? I'm sure. I remember what that general said. He mentioned that His Majesty wanted to meet Ichigo. I'm not exactly sure why, but it doesn't seem like he's a friend of Fairy Tail. I see, muttered Makarov. That did throw a wrench in their plans. And you think the Grand Magic Games might, in reality, be a giant trap? I'm not sure, admitted Natsu. It's just, he didn't seem like he was on the side of the Magic Council. He even described the organization as pitiful, despite the fact he should be a high-ranking official in it. I see why you are worried then, acknowledged Makarov. The problem is that the Grand Magic Games might be our only hope at returning to legal status. Makarov crossed his arms as he thought deeply about the situation. This general, Quilge you called him, do you think he would risk being at the Grand Magic Games? Do you think he would willingly interfere with us? I said it already. He doesn't seem like a friend of Fairy Tail. I know, but that doesn't mean he is an enemy either. Would you call Shinji a friend of Fairy Tail? Natsu reluctantly shook his head. No, I wouldn't. Very good. Now I'll ask again. Do you think Quilge would risk being at the Grand Magic Games? Thinking deeply about the question, Natsu shook his head. No. Why? He didn't seem like he was intending to tell us anything about the Magic Council. It kind of slipped out. I think he's playing a role and I don't think he plans to abandon it. He was going to kill us after all, which is probably why he ended up speaking so much to us. Makarov processed the information carefully before he finally came to a decision. All right, we stick to the plan. I'll warn everyone when we gather again in 3 months, however, to be careful. Crocus will be a haven and a rat trap all in one, and we have to be careful to not get caught, else we'll never leave. Thanks, Master, said Natsu as he started to leave. Oh, Gray wanted a word too. You got time? For my children? Always. Send him in. This also means I can get away with not being in bed under poor Lyusika's orders for a bit longer. Natsu nodded before quickly leaving, Gray slipping in after him. Makarov gave the boy a smile, but he didn't get one in return. He didn't like the look on Gray's face. It showed nothing but worry and not the boy he normally was. What can I do for you, Gray? He found himself asking politely, interlocking his fingers with one another. You seem worried. The Grand Magic Games in 3 months. You have a team in mind, don't you? Makarov frowned but nodded. Yes, I do. I don't really want to let anyone know just yet though, as I may alter things around to create the most suitable team for the competition of who we have available. Did you want to know if I was considering you? No. I want to be removed from the candidates. Makarov's eyes widened. Removed? Why? Please, said Gray, a strange tone entering his voice that sounded unfamiliar to Makarov and Gray's voice. He realized pretty quickly what it was. Gray was begging. Reconsider. Is something the matter, Gray? What's wrong? You don't seem like normal. Gray clenched his fists tightly. Do I have to explain it? Makarov frowned before he slowly nodded. Without a good reason, I don't think I can truly afford to remove you from the roster. You have to understand, Gray, this tournament is the difference of life and death for this guild. You'll probably learn soon that Guild Arts has left, and I only did that because I believe an element of teamwork may be necessary to win, and he's not really suited to fighting with others when you consider what his magic is. Gray struggled for words. I don't trust myself. You don't trust yourself. Are you deaf? I already said that. Gray quickly covered his mouth, his eyes widening in surprise. I'm sorry, that was rude of me. Gray, what's going on? I hear things. A voice in my head, telling me things. To fight, to maim, to kill. Even now I hear it, whispering in my ear, and it's getting worse by the day. Master, the voice sounds exactly like my own. I'm starting to doubt which thoughts are my own and which are being twisted. Makarov didn't say anything, instead watching Gray for any traces of lies. This was suspicious. It reminded him a bit of Ichigo when he believed the boy had been possessed, only this time the situation seemed much worse. What had infected Gray? When had it happened? It could have been days ago, weeks ago, even years ago. There was no way of knowing how long this had been going on for, and he wasn't even sure what the cause might be. Gray. Do you think you can control this? Did you not hear me? I can't dash. I'm asking if you can control it, Gray. Can you survive for a while longer? Master, please dash. What do you want me to do, Gray? Makarov asked harshly, hating each word that came out of his mouth. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you. We're a dark guild as well, so who would help us? But dash. That does not, however, mean that there is no hope. 3 months, 1 tournament, and then we can return to being a legal guild. Can you hold out until then? Can you survive until that happens? How can you ask me to still fight after what I've told you? I don't want to kill anyone. I don't want to end up doing something that isn't me. Makarov sighed before he got up, walking round to the despairing boy and leaned down by his ear. I tell you this only to keep you sane for a little bit longer, and so you can understand. Above all else, Fairy Tale must reclaim our home. We cannot allow anyone to discover what we have hidden there. Hid dash. Quiet. Makarov hissed out. This knowledge does not leave your lips, keep it safe within your mind and use it to give yourself hope. To regain our home, I may be forced to call upon your help to ensure victory. Can you try? For me? For your friends? For the guild? Can you try and have hope for a while longer? Gray slowly nodded. I'll try. But master, if I can't control it then I will take responsibility for your mistakes, Gray. We'll win, and then we'll get you help from the best in all of Fiori. Someone out there can help you, I'm sure of it. Just please, try and stay yourself until then. Keep control of your mind. I believe in you. I wouldn't ask this from you if I didn't. Protector of the Fairies. Ichigo and Nozomi found themselves appearing far above the ground, Ichigo catching Nozomi quickly before she could fall. Mavis leaned on Ichigo's shoulder before pointing out the city. Down there. That might be the city Gildarts was referring to. Didn't he say to be wary of it? We need to check it out at least. Come on. Without waiting for the others, Mavis let herself drop downwards towards the city. Ichigo sighed before he quickly sped after her, Nozomi hanging onto him tightly in case she started to fall. It took only a second for Ichigo to catch up to Mavis, after which he switched into free-falling rather than using Shunpo to fall down freely. It was only when he was starting to reach the ground and where he could make out faces did he rapidly start to control his descent, landing with a small dent in the ground from his feet. It seemed he had managed to land right at the entrance of the town as most of the people he had seen had been around what appeared to have been a market. Letting Nozomi down, Ichigo glanced around and spotted a few curious eyes looking at him from behind the corners of buildings. They appeared to belong to a trio of small children who didn't stick around, instead rushing away the moment he had spotted them. This place is meant to be dangerous, isn't it? Mavis nodded. Yep. I see. I can sense the amount of magic in this town. These people, stuck in a time loop, they are all going to die. Yes, Mavis said, nodding again only a lot more reluctantly this time. They will. Just as they have been for the past 100 years. Maybe longer. I see. Ichigo shook his head sadly. Let's actually make sure this is the right place first of all at least. There's a mountain that looks promising, so we might be right, but it is worth checking. Do you want me to scout ahead, my prince? Asked Nozomi. I'm sure I could dash. No, Ichigo said, cutting her off. This place is not the place for us to split up. We stick together, no matter what. Nozomi nodded. As you wish. She followed after Ichigo swiftly as he started to walk down the streets, both of them letting their senses feel the magic around them. This magic is strange. Glad I'm not the only one who sensed it. Notice anything else? I'm not good enough at sensing to see past this giant shield latched onto the city. Nozomi shook her head. It's distorting my senses too much to be able to tell. I suppose there is good reason for that, however. If this is the right place, all these people are stuck in a loop of life and death. How can I sense them when they are looping between the two? All right then, muttered Ichigo. They walked around the corner before entering the town square, Mavis waiting for them by hovering ahead. She smirked as they turned before both Ichigo's and Nozomi's mouths dropped. Welcome! Cried out 100 voices, the entire town packed into the small square with smiling faces. Large tables looked to have been hastily dragged out and food was currently being brought out to be served with everyone. A few more confident people reached towards Ichigo with welcoming smiles before dragging him forward, bringing him closer to a man who looked to be in charge. The man held his arms out wide before embracing Ichigo in large hug as he reached him. It is an honor to meet another Ukin, said the man. Please, join us in celebration. It's been so long since another of your kind came to visit. Ichigo didn't know what to say, even as he was forced into a seat as food started to get distributed. Nozomi managed to push through the ground before claiming the seat next to him, though not before making a few people unhappy who seemed to have wanted that seat for themselves. Mavis simply floated around, an amused smirk on her face. The man who had greeted Ichigo raised a glass before gesturing at Ichigo. Today we welcome another of God's chosen. How long has it been since the last passed through our humble city? Far too long considering how much we love these celebrations. A lot of people laughed at the man as he spoke, finally snapping Ichigo out of his confusion. Hold on, Ichigo called out. Not to be rude, but why the hell are you greeting me like some kind of hero? Do you not realize? Asked the man, stroking a long beard in front of him. Everything about him Ichigo started to realize resembled a tribalish style, not that far off what Nobara had been dressed with or what the other Nervits had worn. That posed the question of exactly how long ago this city had been founded. Ah, you must be unawakened then. You aren't privy to the site yet. The site. Ichigo frowned before his head shot around the large ground. He hadn't noticed before, but some were using magic. It was little amounts, but it was still magic. And, to top it all off, it was magic he actually recognized. Sky magic. You're sky magic users. A funny term there. We are simply the ones who guide the chosen to the gateway. The observers some call us. Shamans others call us. We exist for your sake, and all the others like yourself. You are the ones that magic chose after all to forever watch over your kind. I see them, muttered Ichigo, looking away. This is the right city. Now then, called out the man. Let us all eat. Let us celebrate the awakening of a new Ukin. Neither Ichigo nor Nozomi touched their plates. It drew them strange looked, but no one seemed to create a fuss. Ichigo slowly starting to rise from his seat, quickly cutting off the protests from those around him. I'm sorry, but I'm in a hurry. If you know what I am, then I assume you know what the Holy Palace is. There were many nods. Ichigo quickly raised a hand towards the mountain before speaking again. Is it up there? Or are we in the wrong place? It is in the correct place, stated the man who first spoke to Ichigo. But there is no rush. Stay and eat. You can even rest here for the night. You and your two friends. 2. Ichigo turned towards Mavis. You can see her? Why yes. Should I not be able to? I don't know. Mavis, did Wendy see you before? Mavis shrugged. I wasn't really paying attention. She may have. I wasn't exactly trying to hide, and she might have noticed no one else noticing me except for you. I see. That's interesting. I wonder if Nobara ever tried to do that as well. That does explain why she was able to be fooled though, even if Nobara was skilled at those illusions. She would have simply seen him and believed him to be as real as I am. I could make better ones, Mavis muttered with a huff. Ichigo ignored her however, instead grabbing onto Nozomi and using Shunpo to get them away quickly. Nozomi looked at him concerned, even as he started walking towards the mountain quickly as if he wanted to get away from the town. Is something wrong? They're too friendly. I can't stay there. Not when I know they are. You know. Going to die. Mavis reappeared floating next to them. I suppose you wouldn't want to see that. It'd probably break you, to be honest. I'm surprised it didn't break Gildarts considering how long he tried to save them for. They looked old, said Nozomi with interest, stopping Mavis from going any further. Their clothes and looks seemed to match those belonging to tribes of over 400 years ago. Do you think they were descendants of them? Do you think that tribe originally created this town to welcome people like you and the king? Oh, they certainly did, stated Mavis, knowing only Ichigo would hear her response. They aren't kidding as well. Sky magic users were once called shamans. They could see a world no one else could. They could see magic, and they came to adore those that magic chose, the Ukin, or gods chosen for just 2 names. I think today was probably one of the greatest days they have ever had since that loop began. I don't want to think about them, muttered Ichigo quietly. Let's hurry. We're almost there. Can you sense it? The energy, humming with excitement. Nozomi shook her head. That might be just you, Ichigo. No, said Mavis in disagreement. I sense it too. You just can't because you can't comprehend it. You aren't meant to. The trio continued onward in silence, Nozomi warily watching their surroundings. Ichigo didn't seem to even spare a glance, and she had to admire his bravery, but it was foolish. She gave another glance around, seeing the eyes of animals as they peered out of their hiding spots at their little group. Why had they not tried to attack? Was that why Ichigo wasn't scared? Because he knew they wouldn't act? This place, she muttered softly. The 100-year quest. Was it all to protect this one place? She looked towards Ichigo, but he seemed to have his gaze locked forward, his stride increasing every so often as if he couldn't hold himself back. She was finding it harder and harder to keep up without breaking into a run. What did he sense that made him feel like this? Then there was Mavis. She heard Ichigo talking to her, and yet it was always so confusing to not hear her respond back. It was worse when Mavis answered her questions for Ichigo's sake and she never heard the answers. What was Mavis? Why could only Ichigo, along with any user of sky magic, see her? Why was she even with them? So lost in her thoughts, she was only snapped out of them when she bumped into Ichigo's back. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. Her voice got caught in her throat as she saw why Ichigo had stopped. In front of them was probably the most incredible sight she had ever seen. A giant golden building, caught between being in the shape of a library, a palace, and a cathedral. A large single tower rose above it at the entrance, and every single brick shown seemed to radiate a golden light, almost blinding her from its intensity. "Nozomi." Ichigo's voice caught her attention. "Leave. Leave." Nozomi frowned before she crossed her arms angrily. "I didn't come with you all this way to abandon you, no. You misunderstand. If you look through those doors, you will lose all the sight you possess. That's what happened to Hades. Like him, you aren't meant to see inside there either, and if you do, this magic will take your sight as compensation for the things you'll see." Nozomi continued frowning, but she saw the logic in what Ichigo was saying. "Then I'll wait back here. I'll wait until you come back out." "No, Nozomi," Ichigo replied instantly. "You are to leave. This place is far too dangerous for you to stay in. Those creatures won't harm me, but if you are out here on your own, then they will attack. And you might not be able to survive for how long I might be in there." Ichigo sighed as he stared at the holy palace. "I don't even know how long I might be in there. Please, just leave. I can wait. It's not far of me to ask you that. You should live your life this time, or at least ensure you don't waste the time I'll be gone for. I will return, there will be no doubt about that." Nozomi shook her head. "My prince, I cannot dash." "That's an order, Nozomi," Ichigo said, shutting Nozomi up instantly. "I didn't want to say those words. I don't want to give your orders like this. Orders, I know that, if spoken like this, you will not disobey. Leave, Nozomi. Stay safe. Go back to Mist Agen. If you really cannot find anything you want to do, then stay with Fairy Tail." I understand," Nozomi finally said reluctantly. "I will obey." She let a portal open up behind her, already locked on the familiar presence that was Mist Agen. "And when you return, I'll come to you all. I'll be back. I swear." Nozomi nodded before she vanished into the green energy, the portal closing as she stepped through. Ichigo sighed before turning back to the holy palace, slowly beginning to approach it. Mavis hovered by his side, looking at him in concern. "You did the right thing. She'd never obey if you didn't order her to." "I know. But it doesn't feel right to use that influence over her. I don't want to be the prince. I don't want her to die for my sake. She should live." Mavis smiled before she stopped floating and took to hanging off Ichigo's shoulder. "An order out of kindness. That's not a bad thing, you know." "I know." Ichigo stopped right before the large double doors of the holy palace, a large elaborate diagram of magic circles that he couldn't even understand, and yet at the same time could. "This is... How do I know this? What is it?" "It's the lock. And you remember what Aoyasu said, right? You are an Uken. You are the key." "I know," said Ichigo as he raised a hand to the door and pressed it against the central magic circle. The whole array glowed a bright black before a slit appeared along the array, widening as the doors began to open. A large gust of wind blew out all around him as the pressure of the magic within began to change the very atmosphere itself. Ichigo himself was froze, in shock as his entire viewpoint seemed to shift. For Hades, the man had lost the sight in his eyes when he looked. For Ichigo, it was different. It was like the whole had been missing color for his whole life and now it was there. He could see it, and he knew instantly this was what Wendy saw every single day. This was magic. He didn't even hesitate as he walked inside, the doors slowly closing behind him. The idea that they might seal him away never even occurred to him as he kept walking, eyeing everything in sight with wonder. The inside was more like a giant library and armory, but he knew there was even more to it. Some things had to be shown in a different form after all. The sound of footsteps made him hesitate, however. They weren't his own. He let his hands fall towards his blades, ensuring he was prepared for anything. Finally, after the seconds that had felt like days, a man walked round the corner of a bookshelf, an amused smirk on his face as he spotted Ichigo. 7 years it's been. When I told you to go to the Holy Palace, I didn't think you'd take this long. How have you been, oh brother of mine? Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.